our trees and fields ahead of us. We were all getting more and more excited, to say the least. After a further 20 minutes, we are now at the sawmill. However, we would have to park at the car park and hike about 2 miles further to the mill. We didn't mind, we all work out and we were all fit for the walk. Walking along the trail, you can see that no one has been here for a long time. We had to push aside branches just so we could get past. I could tell that this could take us a few hours to get there from how thick the vegetation now is. After a crawling few hours, pushing past thick branches and kicking aside weeds, we are now at the sawmill. It was so overgrown, you could tell nature was now taking back the land she had once lost back when they were operational. When we got to the sawmill, it was now dark and had to get out our flashlights out just to see around us. This was scary as we could see shadows around us. We just put this down to the trees moving around in the area. In videos you see on YouTube, you would see people who would separate from their group. However, we didn't do that. We knew that if we did, then someone could get hurt and maybe not be able to call for help, so we all stuck together just in case. Looking around the area, you could see how creepy it was around here. There was no light as the trees in the area covered the light from the moon. The only light around here was the light from our flashlights. What we all heard next had us all stunned. Looking around the group, everyone's face was as white as a ghost. The sound we all heard sounded like one of those old World War sirens from back in the day. We all looked around, looking for that sound that we heard. We couldn't see anything around us. Even with the flashlights, we couldn't see anything. We were all now nervous at what we heard but can't see. We didn't get a break after what we heard, as straight after we heard someone talking over a loudspeaker. At the time, we all thought that we got caught and there was someone approaching us. We all waited to see who it was, however, no one showed and now we are all getting scared. Next, the talking stopped and now weird noises just started calling out over this loudspeaker. We are all now looking around us but still, there is nothing that can be seen. We all looked at each other and without saying anything, we all decided to make our way back to the car, but this time, the noise was getting louder, a sign that whatever it was not approaching us. We didn't want to be in the area to find out what it was. We all gather and start heading back. We keep out cameras trained on the trail ahead of us. Our cameras have night vision and because of that, it would pick things up that we would not be able to see otherwise. We are about a quarter of the way back to our cars when one of the guys ahead of us halted with a real bad look on his face. "What up?" we asked him. However, he could not speak but instead, lifted his shaking arm and pointed to the trees ahead of us. Looking to where we were pointed, we could not see anything. "There is nothing there," we told him, but he just kept pointing as we continued to look ahead. He then pointed his camera ahead of us and raised it so we all could see the screen. Looking at the screen of this camera, we couldn't believe what we could see. The sound now loud as ever and in front, you could see what looked like a tree moving around. Whatever this creature was, it was massive. The body of this creature went way above the tree line. I pointed the camera up following the silhouette of the creature until I could see the head of the creature. What now scared me, there was no head but instead, 2 loudspeakers facing opposite, both with teeth. We are all now really scared for ourselves and now pondering on to get out of here. Making things worse, this creature knew exactly where we were and was approaching us fast. I looked to the other and told them to turn off their lights and use the night vision on the cameras to get down the trail. This however was no use, because he had such long legs. He managed to get ahead of us. I also reckon he could also see us too. Then we heard a blood-curdling scream as one of our mates was grabbed from our pack and just shoved into the mouth of the creature. At that moment, We all knew how bad things were, we all just starting running towards our car, but it was no use. Another scream, and another mate eaten by this creature. It seemed that it was no good, no matter how fast we ran, this creature was still with us. By the time we got to our car, 4 of our mates was now gone, eaten by this creature. Just as I opened all the doors, the creature grabbed another mate. The sound you hear of bone being crunched by teeth is not something you want to hear. 3 of us now left, 3 of us in the car. I put the car into reverse and just peel out of there. I must have broken the speed limit to get back into town, just to get away from the creature. However, running was useless. It followed us. Yes, followed us. We could see it behind us running after the car, speeding down the road, and this creature could keep us with a speeding car. I thought about losing the creature by taking side roads, and at some point, I must have lost it as I could not see it anymore. As soon as I knew I lost it, I went straight home. My mates got out and they all went home too. Now back at my own house, I sit in my bedroom now crying at the loss of my other mates, that is until another of my mate ring me. Upon picking up the phone, he tells me it is no good, it knows we live. What do you mean, I asked just before the phone dies. Now knowing what my mate said, I quickly pack some stuff and head out. I didn't care about where I went, just as long as I am one step ahead of this creature, but just as my mate said, it is no use, he knows where we are, and he will come for me. All I have to do is keep one step ahead of it.
Other good old age story of the Slender Man. We have all heard of the Slender Man, a supernatural thin creature, sometimes with tentacles proceeding from his back and sometimes not. That part of the story has never collaborated. What we do know about Slender Man, however, is that this creature commonly stalks, abducts and even traumatizes people, particularly children. No one knows why he appears or for what reason. Before Slender Man does appear, there are noticeable signs that he is approaching. For one, any electrical device that produces sound will produce a static sound with any lights on that device starting to flash. Secondly, if you do not carry any device such as a mobile phone, MP3 player or even a Walkman, the only other way to tell that he is coming is to pay attention to street lights that are around you. These lights will start to flicker as if the area has just been visited by a ghost. However, if you do not have any street lights or electrical items on you, then there is another way you could tell if he is approaching. For one, the air around you will develop in a thick fog, so thick you cannot see your hand. Second, the air will also become ice cold as if someone had sucked all the heat from the air. Now I have told you about the Slender Man. Let me tell you about the story of when I ran into the Slender Man and how I managed to get away from him. I can't recall what I did to get away, but I will try my best to remember. So when this happened, I just turned sweet 16. My parents promised me a birthday party for a couple of days after. I guess it was a bit unconventional, but that didn't matter to me. After all, I was getting my party. In my room, I looked to my calendar and started marking the days off with a cross. 6 days to go, I thought to myself. I couldn't wait. All my friends will be there, and also, my parents told me that I had one big present left to unwrap. I was so excited, to say the least. My parents even let me plan my own party, which was awesome in my eyes. I look around for a good venue. It had to be big as most of my school would be attending. After a little searching around, I found a perfect venue. The venue I chose had stairs that lead downstairs into a ballroom. perfect for when I made an entrance, I thought to myself. Now with the venue sorted, I left the decorations to my parents. They loved that sort of thing. Now with the venue and the decorations sorted, there was only one thing left to do, and that was my favorite thing, looking for a new dress to wear at the party. I arranged to go to town with my friends the next day. This day seemed to have gone so fast with having to sort everything out with the part. I put on my PJs and gave my friends a ring through Skype. We talked on Skype for what seemed like hours, talking about the type of dress that we were going to buy. I woke up the next day very excited, being able to buy a new dress for my birthday party. I hopped into the shower, got myself dressed and went downstairs to have my breakfast. I would say I would have about 2 hours before my friend come to collect me before going to the mall. In the meantime, I went back upstairs to my room and just browsed online at what type of shops I had at our mall. I must have lost track of time because before I know it, I heard the sound of a horn just outside my house. Getting up and having a look at who it could be, it was, of course, my friends waiting for me in the driveway. I packed up what I needed, my mobile phone and my iPod, and put them into my bag and headed downstairs. I told my mother that I was going to the mall. I turned to my dad as he said good luck and planted a few $100 into my hand. That was something I was not expecting to happen, but I thought to myself, maybe now I can be a complete outfit and maybe some new makeup. I kissed my dad on the cheek, told him to thank you, and went outside to my friends. Getting in the car with my phone in hand, I noticed something very strange with my phone. The screen started to flicker, but what made things even more strange was, I started to hear static through my iPod. This was very strange to me indeed, as I was not even using the radio on the iPod but some tracks I had put on myself. I decided that there was a malfunction of some kind with both devices, a little strange but could happen. I reset both devices, which returned to normal afterwards. While driving to the mall, I talked excitedly with my friends on how great this party would be. They did tell me that it was sad that there will be no booze, but what the heck, we don't need it to have a good time. Now at the mall parking up, I noticed again that my phone and iPod was acting up again. Seeing as they are both Apple products, I just decided to take this into the Apple store and get them checked out. They should still be within warranty and shouldn't cost me anything. When we entered the mall, I asked my friends if we could quickly pop over to the Apple store as I was having a few problems with my phone. Thankfully, they all agreed and we made our way there. Taking out my phone and iPod, it seemed whatever was happening to my devices had stopped. Great, I thought to myself, how typical. Now this will be hard to find any problems with the phone. I handed the representative my phone, iPod, and told them the problem I was having with both of them. Even the representative said that this was strange but would have a look. They plug the devices into a computer and scanned them for any problems. However, again nothing popped up. They did apologize to me for not finding anything wrong, but did say to come back if I had any more problem, which was great. The customer service was excellent from the store. Walking around the mall while window shopping, I thought I was starting to see things. Something that I was a horrid sight. It seemed to be in every direction I looked. After a few minutes I had to ask my friends if they could see what I was seeing, but they looked around and couldn't see anything. I was starting to think I was going crazy and seeing this person. However, this was no ordinary person I could see. Very tall and very thin. That wasn't a problem, but what made the problem worse was the man had no face. I pinched myself thinking I was still asleep, but no, that hurt and I didn't wake up. I told my friends about it, which did make them cautious, but just asked me in return, "Did you mother or father bake you some special brownies?" In which I returned and told them heck no, I would never touch that stuff. The figure did seem to disappear after a few hours of us walking around the mall. I had been so worried about seeing this person that I forgot all about my dress. My friends stopped in front of a store and asked, "How about this place?" I looked into the store and to my surprise, they had some really beautiful dresses. With time against us now, I decided to get my dress from here along with my shoes to match. I now had 3 hours before the store was to close, but I just took my time choosing several dresses I like. I must admit I had fun trying them on and pretending I was on a catwalk. I had also forgotten about the tall thin man following me. After about an hour and a half, I chose the perfect dress, slim pink so it would show all of my curves, a shiny tiara and pink high heel shoes. Perfect for a party princess, I thought to myself. My other friends who were also with me, also brought new dresses, but their dresses weren't as good as mine. I just think that they saw me as the host and thought I should be the best looking girl there as it was my birthday. I loved my friends that way. Heading out of the store, I noticed that my Apple devices started to act up again. However, the mall was shutting very soon and I didn't have any more time to go back to the Apple store and thought to leave it for another day. Outside the store, the scene was something like Silent Hill, the movies or the game, you choose. It was very foggy outside, also it felt like someone had sucked all the warmth out of the air. It was freezing. Lucky I didn't bring a cardigan with me. I put it on to try and get a bit warm. It helped a little, but I could still feel a sharp frost through my cardigan. We all rushed to the car, just so we can turn on the heating and head home. On the way home, I started to see him again. This time he was everywhere I looked. This can't be right, I thought to myself. No one can run faster than a car. It seemed that every few hundred yards this man was pointing as we drove past. Now at home, I went and told my parents on what I thought I see. I can't say I did see him as I wasn't sure. They just looked at me and giggled to themselves while asking me if I have been on the wacky-backy. They were relaxed parents about some stuff. I don't think they would have minded me smoking stuff like that, but anything harder then they would have grounded my ass. They did say that perhaps I was a bit overexcited and was seeing them. They are right, I thought to myself. That week did go fairly fast, but not without being very strange for me. For a start, my Apple devices still acted up, but now it wasn't just the devices. The lights in my bedroom would start to flicker. This only happened in my room and nowhere else in my room. Also my computer did the same, but not my parents or brothers. Even at night when I woke up from a deep sleep, I even thought I was what was a mist or fog in my room, but put it down to being half asleep still as I did go back to sleep. However, I did not see any more of this man that I saw earlier in the week. This made me feel a little better, but not much, as I still can't explain all the other strange stuff happening. The day before the party, I got onto Skype with my friend and told her all about my experiences. She didn't have an explanation either. She did tell me to have a go at Googling it, thought. Thinking to myself that it couldn't hurt to Google it, I decided to go and do exactly that. I Googled everything that happened to me and I got thousands of hits. However, going through Google, I did notice one subject that kept occurring. I clicked on one of the websites and scanned through it. I then noticed that whatever happened to me was also happening to other people. They even saw that strange figure that I saw myself. The website dubbed him as Slender Man. However, the website said that this creature was an urban legend and shouldn't exist, but looking through several websites, he has been around for thousands of years and haunted the dreams of millions of children and teens, never adults. With the party the next day, I decided to put it to the back of my mind. I wanted this party to be a night to be remembered. After all, it's only once a girl turns sweet 16. I woke up the next day ecstatic. I just couldn't wait for the party. However, I was still having strange things happening to me, which brought my memories back to those websites I visited the night before. No way on earth could urban legends could be true, I thought to myself, but what on earth could this be that is happening to me? Again I put it to the back of my head and started to get ready for the party. It was now time for the party. I head out on my own as my parents told me to. I think they didn't want me to see the last present they brought me. While walking over to the party, things got a lot worse. The mist or fog returned, it turned colder than the North Pole. My phone started to act up again, and then there he was, right in front of me, that figure I had seen at the mall. I stood there for a second, frozen in fear. Then quickly as he came, he left. I snapped out of this daze and hurried my rush to the party. The fog and cold remained. My sixth sense clicked in and forced me to look behind. Again there he was. This time, however, it seems he is coming for me, but not walking, no. Instead, he seemed to disappear then reappear even closer to me, like he was teleporting himself closer to me. I started to jog to get to the party fast to where I knew it would be safer for me, but then the creature began to teleport even closer to me. He was now chasing me. I picked up my pace and ran faster. No matter how fast I ran, he just got closer and closer to me. I started to feel myself panic. I knew I need to get to safety. I kept this in my mind as I ran and ran. At one point I could swear I could feel the breath on my neck. I can see the last corner in sight where I knew that by turning right, the venue is right there, and so would my safety be. I looked back to see if I was still being chased. I couldn't see him behind me, but I just kept running. I didn't want him to catch up to me at any cost. I looked back to where I was running to and my heart about dropped. I could have had a heart attack because right now this creature wasn't behind me but now in front of me. I was now petrified. Luckily I knew a back entrance into the venue, but I also didn't want him to know where I was going. I decided that at the last moment, I would change direction and confuse him. This was however dangerous as I didn't want him to catch me. I got near and near to him, my heart pounding more and more and harder than it ever has. I see it. The other entrance. I look back towards him. He is now doing something strange with his hands, but I didn't care. I needed to do what I needed to keep safe. I was about 300 meters away from him when I suddenly changed direction. He also started to teleport towards me, but it was no use. I got inside just in the nick of time. I thought it was over, but I was so wrong. He decided to carry on coming after me. He even teleported inside the building. I picked myself up and ran to the room where my party was. Very lucky, I managed to run inside to where all my friends and family were. As soon as I got in, I collapsed onto the floor to where my friends and family ran up to me, asking what's the matter. All I could tell them was that I was being chased by a man. Who else would believe me about a faceless, tall, thin man in a black suit? My parents went outside to see if they could see anything of the man but couldn't. They came back inside and called the police to canvass the area to look for him and arrest him. I don't really know how they are going to arrest someone who can teleport.
Ever since the phone was invented in 1876, there have been reports of all different numbers that was supposed to be haunted, or if you call them, then you would get a very airy answer on the other end telling you that you would have so many days left to live. Think of it like the Ring movie. You watch the video and then your phone rings telling you that you have 7 days to live. Anyway, back to topic. There is one such number out there that has now become some king of challenge, especially to the YouTube community. They would call the number and you can hear creepy things in the background and other noises, but when you call the number back again, it doesn't seem to work. What makes things worse, the damn number don't even show on your phone bill. I have read and watched many stories like this, thinking, no way is this true. One such article I came across was in the local newspaper. A woman breastfeeding her child got 48 messages. All the messages was from the same person. This person name so happened to be Satan. In these messages, it just repeated the same message: you have 3 days to die. All these messages came after she missed one phone call from this number. I didn't believe in this. I thought this was made up by some person looking to get famous on YouTube, and then it became one of these so-called challenges that these YouTubers would do for their viewers. Well, that wasn't till about 2 days ago that story changed my mind. You see, I was with a few of my mates driving down to the drive-thru. We was about halfway there when I got a phone call. I looked at the number but was shocked at what number I saw. The number on my phone came up as 666, 666, 6666. I thought to myself, really, some phone company actually gave this number to a person who asked for it. I showed my friends, who started laughing and again couldn't believe the number that came up. My friends told me to answer the phone and put it on to speaker, so this is what I did. I must admit, what I had next did indeed really creep me out, but my friends just kept on laughing as if they had set up the prank themselves just to scare the living daylights out of me.
You will die in 3 days.
But my friends just kept on laughing as if they had set up the prank themselves just to scare the living daylights out of me. There seemed to be an echo on the other end of the phone call, static, with someone telling me that I would die in 3 days' time. The phone hung up. I looked towards my mates, who went from laughing out loud to now giggling under their breath. Can you believe the nerves of some people? I told them as I continued to stare at the screen of my phone. One of my mates told me that I should ring the number back and give them a what for. The other friend agreed, and I must admit, I had to do this as I was left a little shaken. I went to my call history to call back the number but was shocked to find that the number that called me was not even in the call history. Luckily enough, the number itself was quite easy to remember, so I inputted the number into my phone and pressed the call button. I shit you not, if I was freaked out before then, right now, I am shitting bricks, for you see, the only thing I got back from that call was that the number was not recognized. Ever since the phone was invented in 1876, there have been reports of all different numbers that was supposed to be haunted, or if you call them, then you would get a very airy answer on the other end telling you that you would have so many days left to live. Think of it like the Ring movie. You watch the video and then your phone rings telling you that you have 7 days to live. Anyway, back to topic. There is one such number out there that has now become some king of challenge, especially to the YouTube community. They would call the number and you can hear creepy things in the background and other noises, but when you call the number back again, it doesn't seem to work. What makes things worse, the damn number don't even show on your phone bill. I have read and watched many stories like this, thinking, no way is this true. One such article I came across was in the local newspaper. A woman breastfeeding her child got 48 messages. All the messages was from the same person. This person name so happened to be Satan. In these messages, it just repeated the same message: you have 3 days to die. All these messages came after she missed one phone call from this number. I didn't believe in this. I thought this was made up by some person looking to get famous on YouTube, and then it became one of these so-called challenges that these YouTubers would do for their viewers. Well, that wasn't till about 2 days ago that story changed my mind. You see, I was with a few of my mates driving down to the drive-thru. We was about halfway there when I got a phone call. I looked at the number but was shocked at what number I saw. The number on my phone came up as 666, 666, 6666. I thought to myself, really, some phone company actually gave this number to a person who asked for it. I showed my friends who started laughing and again couldn't believe the number that came up. My friends told me to answer the phone and put it on to speaker, so this is what I did. I must admit, what I had next did indeed really creep me out, but my friends just kept on laughing as if they had set up the prank themselves just to scare the living daylights out of me.
You will die in 3 days.
But my friends just kept on laughing as if they had set up the prank themselves just to scare the living daylights out of me. There seemed to be an echo on the other end of the phone call, static with someone telling me that I would die in 3 days' time. The phone hung up. I looked towards my mates whom went from laughing out loud to now giggling under their breath. Can you believe the nerves of some people? I told them as I continued to stare at the screen of my phone. One of my mates told me that I should ring the number back and give him a what for. The other friend agreed, and I must admit, I had to do this as I was left a little shaken. I went to my call history to call back the number but was shocked to find that the number that called me was not even in the call history. Luckily enough, the number itself was quite easy to remember, so I inputted the number into my phone and pressed the call button. I shit you not, if I was freaked out before then, right now, I am shitting bricks, for you see, the only thing I got back from that call was that the number was not recognized.
We have all heard of some type of urban legend these days. Urban legends are being told from family to family and by friends, usually around a campfire, trying to scare the crap out of us, or maybe our parents would tell us these stories, maybe to make us behave or maybe to keep us away from a specific area, but we will never know why our parents scare us so. Maybe the reason why we don't believe in these stories is for the reason we don't want to, that there could be so much evil in the world. With this story I am about to tell you, this was told by my mother. Her friend had a daughter and this story happened to her. This gives me the creeps, and now because of it, I am too afraid to go down to the woods or even Lover's Lane. So here is the story my mom told to me and my friends when I was about 16 years old. I guess I told my mom that I was going down to the woods with my boyfriend later that night. As you can imagine, I was scared to death and now will never step foot there again. My mother's friend daughter and her boyfriend were on their way home from somewhere, not important. One night, the couple decided to make a detour and would spend some time alone in the woods. You know what lovers get up to these days. The couple parked off the main road, in a part of the woods, off the main track. They didn't really want it to be bothered with people passing by. As you could properly guess what they were going to get up to, the man, being brave for his sweetheart and not fearing anything, wanted to go for a leak. The guy stepped out of the car, saying comfortably to his girlfriend, "Don't worry, I'll be back. I'm just going to find somewhere to take a leak. Make sure you lock the doors and windows while I am gone." She locked the doors and sat restlessly while waiting for her boyfriend to finish up with his business. Suddenly, she sees a shadow fall across her lap. She looks up to see, not her boyfriend, but a strange, crazed-looking man. She looked deep at him as he was swinging something in his hand. The girlfriend let out a horrifying scream. The boyfriend, hearing her screams, quickly does up his zip on his trousers. "I'll be right there," he shouts as he starts running towards the car. As the boyfriend runs to the car, this crazed-looking man starts to run away from the car. A sigh of relief hits her as her boyfriend is on the way back and the other man was now gone. She kept waiting, but 5 minutes had passed. Her boyfriend never turned up. A few minutes later, she heard what she thought to be footsteps in the distance. She was both relieved but yet scared as she did not know who it was. Although she could hear the footsteps, there was still no sign of her boyfriend, but yet the footsteps continued. This continued for a few seconds until the girl realized that her boyfriend is most likely playing a joke on her. The girl decided that enough is enough and wanted to teach him a lesson and make him walk home that night. The girl now jumps into the driver's seat thinking enough is enough. Lucky the keys was still in the ignition. She turns on the car and starts to pull away until she hears what she thought to be a scream. She stops the car and looks around but doesn't see anything. Thinking that it was her boyfriend yet again playing a prank on her, this time she floors the gas pedal but imminently brakes when she hears a even worse blood-curdling scream. Now not being able to contain what is happening, she gets out of the car to look around. Looking above the car, she turns white as a ghost as she witnesses her boyfriend's head on the roof and his body dangling from a rope that was attached to the bumper of the car. While looking up at the body, her eyes set upon a figure in the tree line. She screams as the figure waves at her and starts to walk towards her. Now I don't know about you, but this story scared the pants off me. I would never be able to go into the woods again. Not even in the daytime. I am thankful that my mother's friend got her daughter back, but she is now scarred from that night and will need therapy properly for the rest of her life.
In the 1980s, I lived in a town with around 1,000 residents. For this reason, our town was one of the smallest in America. When growing up in the 70s as a teen finishing school, it can be hard finding things to do around the city. There are no malls, no cinemas, no attractions. However, what we did have was mostly festivals. However, these festivals were once a year and so we would have to wait each year for them to come around. I must admit, when the festival did hit the town, it was nothing like you have ever seen. The town would make it big, and at night, there was always a band playing. This music was so loud and bassy that you could hear and feel it from the next town over. To say the least, that next town must really hate us for throwing our festivals. We only have 4 festivals with our Halloween being the largest. It was great, the whole town got involved and I would say, the whole town looked something of a ghost town. It was awesome. The best part of our Halloween festival would be the hayride, which opened around 10 at night. The whole town would come together, dress up in their scary clothes, and scare visitors. The ride would start at the beginning of the farm and go on a 5-mile tour around the farm. We had zombies, scarecrows that would come alive when you get near to them, people with chainsaws that ran up to the tractor, and also props all over the place, including the traditional pumpkin and haystacks which had a path. Here at the farm was also a scary maze made from the sweet corn field. Here it would mostly be ghouls and zombies. It was amazing. Each time it was on, I would take a trip through in the field, and every time it was different. I must say, they really did a good job putting it together and making people scream. This next Halloween that we had coming up would change the whole atmosphere of the town. Thing here would never be the same again, never. So get ready as I tell you the story of how one Halloween attraction changed our whole town. This was in the year 75 and we were 2 months away now from our next Halloween festival. Looking around our town, you could see that so many people were getting very excited about the festival. All throughout the town, people were starting to put up decorations related to Halloween. Every shop and house had started to put up the decorations. Every street, every corner you went down had them. When driving down the streets and looking into garages, you could actually see people making changes to Halloween floats as well as making new floats. You see, on Halloween Day, we have a float parade that consists of a lot of people driving down the streets and all types of crazy horror scenes and monsters. I will admit, I too was looking forward to the festival and so had decided to work on my own house with Halloween decorations. I decided that I would try a foggy zombie graveyard type of scene. I had zombies that would jump out at you and well as some that will just sit up out of the grave. That along with a fog machine, made my garden looking scary as hell. Another thing that our city did was also a horror scene competition with our decorated houses, that was judged on Halloween Eve and I couldn't wait for that competition to start. Roll on 2 months, we are now on the eve of Halloween, my decorations are now up and ready to be judged. Looking around the neighborhood, I can see that I and only 2 others went way beyond and completely decorated the whole house and garden. The judges came around the neighborhood around 8 at night, that way it would have been scarier for them when these corpses would jump out of their grave and scare the judges. I must admit, it didn't take long. I guess not many people took part in the competition that I thought. There were about 5 houses that took part and I come in 3rd place. I was thrilled. Usually, I would come in last or somewhere near last anyway. Well, now the competition was over, I decided to go to the scary hayride at the farm. I wanted to take a ride and see if they made any changes to their scene or whether they kept it the same or not. There was a long line waiting for the ride. It must have taken me about an hour to get on the hayride, but I was pleased to see that they did indeed made a change to the ride. This time they had bodies cut in half with blood and guts hanging out, even so far as to have these half bodies hanging in the trees. It looked like something out of a horror movie. It was brilliant and yet scary, well for those who can't stomach it and kids of course. They even changed the makeup of the people who would jump out at you. I did indeed love it. Considering the hayride was 5 miles long, it took an hour and a half to finish the ride, which is a good buck for your money, and to top it off, you got plenty of scares in too. Now that the ride was over, there was one thing that I need to do next, and that would be the scary maze. I decided to queue up and wait to get in. They only allow about 5 people at once. The line for the scary maze didn't take as long as the hayride, about half an hour waiting in the queue, so it was quite fast. Considering they were letting 5 people in at once, the line went down fairly fast and before I knew it, I was next in line to go in. Now entering the maze, I could see that they did not stick with the usual blueprint. This would make it harder for me to get through as I did learn the route to the middle and out. However, this did not matter and decided to enjoy myself. I went around corners, down long corridors and kept getting myself lost. I was nervous but also loved it at the same time. I see they used the same style of decorations as on the hayride. Half bodies here and there with people jumping out at you. They did scare me, I would admit it. I came to a very long corridor which felt a little different. There was something off about it. I could not even put my finger on it. I decided that I would take my time down this one. It was very creepy and airy. The corridor I was wandering down was extra dark. There was fog but I could not see any fog machines about. There was also this stench like rotting flesh. If this was fake, then they did a really good job, I thought to top myself. I got about halfway down when I stopped and I got this really bad feeling in my stomach. Looking up, I saw what I thought was a decoration like the rest, a half torso hanging in the air with the lower half on the floor. The blood was still dripping. Even I know the fact that when you put fake blood on things, the blood dries up. However, this blood did not. I took a closer look at the body and used my finger to get a dab of blood on my finger. I wanted to look at the blood more carefully. Taking a sniff of the blood, I would say that it was very fresh indeed, like it was put on about an hour ago. This was very strange, but the blood also smelled a little, like it was clotting and starting to rot. I wiped the blood off my finger onto my shirt and take a closer look at the face. It looked very much real. I poked the skin and at the moment, my heart sank. I knew in my heart that this was a real body, someone that was killed not long ago. I did not recognize who this is, must have been someone outside of town. We did get visitors coming to check out the hayride and scary maze. Now knowing that there was a dead body and a killer could still be on the loose, I ran for my life trying to find my way out. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to find my way out and immediately called the police. The owner saw I was distressed and came over to ask me what is wrong, as he knew me very well. I told him what I saw and he shut down the attraction straight away. For all we knew, the killer could still be in the maze waiting for his next victim. The farmer decided to turn on the floodlights he set up around the maze. He did this in case someone would panic and could not find their way out. The police showed up and I told them about what I saw. They went into the maze to take a look at the body and to also see if they could find someone hiding out from them. I hate to say, they did not find anyone, and so the murder went unsolved, waiting for the next Halloween to strike again.
The human clown. If you ask me if I ever believed in urban stories, then I would have told you no. They are just stories being told around a campfire to scare the kids so they would not wander off during the night, or to keep the children under control when they misbehave. You know, we have all done it when the kids wind us up. With my story, this is something I thought would never happen to me. I mean, come on, who would believe such a thing as a human clown hiding in a child's bedroom buying their time until they can come and get you for whatever reason? It just sounds like a plot from a horror story. Well, so I thought. So to tell my story I must go back to when I was a teenager. During the week I would hang out with my friends and window shop at the mall, while at weekends I would go to the beach with my family. I delighted in the barbecue, the delicious taste of smoked barbecue burgers and the taste of hot dogs with the trimmings. I enjoyed the games more. I loved a game of volleyball against my siblings. Who doesn't want to beat their brothers at a game? One weekend on the summer holidays we met up with one of my mother's oldest friend. After overhearing her talk to my mother about needing a babysitter, I had an idea. I knew I needed money for the rest of summer and perhaps after in the school term. I confidently went up to my mother's friend and asked if she would mind me helping her out with me babysitting for her. I was delighted when she did agree. So 2 days later I found myself having to dress sensibly and walking around to my mother's house to start my new job. When my mother friend opened the door, she must be going for a night out, I told myself as she was well dressed on a long tight black dress with her hair waverly tied back. "Come in," she said to me as I gazed upon the marble surrounding the front door. My mouth dropped as I set foot into the foyer. It was like setting foot into a grand hotel, and so modern as well. "Come with me," she said. We went a spiral staircase and reached the second floor. "This is the twins' room," as she gazed at me while opening the door. I looked inside. The room seems to be double the size of mine. I was in awe but jealous too. She took me to a second room. This time without a glance she opened the door and told me, "This is the youngest room." I looked inside but the room didn't seem to be as big as the other, but still a decent size. Mine, who needs a room as big as the other when there is only one person sleeping there, I thought. After the tour upstairs she took me downstairs and showed me around. The usual rooms could be found just a little larger: living, kitchen and entertaining room. Last of all we went outside to the back where there was a beautiful pool with several fun slides and a waterfall made from a rockery. I couldn't believe a place like this could ever exist. After the tour, when went into the room, "Can I get you a drink?" she asked as I sat down. "A Coke would be great, thank you," I told her. After she came back with my Coke, she sat down and told me there is rules that I must put in place. First of all, emergency numbers can be found on the fridge, including mine and my husband's. So looking at her eye, listening to her demands, they were the usual things such as don't let the kids swim after they had a bite to eat, make the kids clean up after themselves, the children have to be in bed by 7 p.m. at the latest, and they are only allowed one friend over, only if they are good and behave themselves. But how I spend my time with them is up to me, whether I want to play games with them or let them play computer games in their room. Is there anything you would like to ask me, she said. Yes, I replied, thinking back to the pool. Would it be okay if I could bring over a friend who could help me maybe? She took a short pause to think about it and replied, yes you can, but I must advise that you only bring over one friend. I would also like to have no boys in my house. So after listening to her, I happily agreed. Half an hour later, while she continued to get her stuff together, she left with her husband in a silver Bentley. After she had left, I got straight on to the phone to my oldest and dearest friend. Grab your swimsuit and come over, I told her. An hour later, I was startled by a knock on the door as I was watching a horror movie. I cautiously got up and checked the CCTV system. I was very relieved as I saw it was my oldest friend. I borrowed a bathing suit from the woman as she was in my size, and I thought you wouldn't mind either. We both sat around the pool talking about the usual, boys, clothes. We then got the kids and had some fun splashing around in the pool and playing games. While in the house, I looked at the clock. 1800 hours it read. Boy, how time flies, I thought to myself. I then called the kids in along with my friend. I proceeded to make them dinner. The kids was so well behaved. They cleaned themselves up and set the table without even asking or me telling them to. After they ate dinner, I let them watch some cartoon for the next half hour. 7 came around so fast as I looked back at the clock again. I gave my friend a look and she knew what I was going to do. Right, all of you, it is bedtime, I told them. They all got up and proceeded to the stairs and went up to their rooms. The twins was easy to get off to bed as they was the oldest, however the little girl was harder as I had to read her a story as she would not go to sleep without one. While reading her favorite storybook, I could not help but notice a human-sized doll. It sent chills down my spine as it looked like a clown, and I hated clowns. I could not stand the sight of them. The little girl kept tugging me as I gazed at the clown to continue with the story. I could not get away from its gaze as its eyes seemed to follow me. I could not take any more of this clown and decided to put a blanket over its head. I did feel a little better but was still wary as I know it was still there. After I read the book, I gave the little girl a kiss on the forehead and went back downstairs to my friend. Seeing my friend on the settee, she was watching her favorite show, X on the Beach. How on earth could someone watch that rubbish, I thought to myself. I decided to keep her happy and watch the show with her. The show was halfway in as I heard a band. Me and my friend looked at each other. Don't worry, it's probs one of the kids, she told me. I decided to go upstairs and check on the kids as they had to be in bed right now and not out doing whatever they wanted. I reached the twins' room and expected them to be out of bed playing around, but to my surprise they were both asleep. I then went to the little girl's room to check on her, but yet again it seems the girl was asleep until I saw the clown doll was actually on the floor next to the girl's bedroom. I must admit, it did give me shivers, but I just thought to myself that the girl wanted him in bed with her and not wanting to be in trouble got back into bed. Not wanting to scold her, I decided we all sleep with teddies and dolls, and so would have been natural for someone of her age. I then went back downstairs to join my friend who was now watching Love Island. Great, I thought to myself, as that is another program I hated with a passion. I went to the kitchen and got 2 bowls out of the bottom cupboard and filled them with chocolate ice cream. 10 minutes while eating our ice cream, we heard the bang again. So once more I went up the stairs and checked up on the children. The twins was still asleep and nothing disarray in their room. Again I then proceeded to the little girl's room, and again nothing amiss, but I did notice that the clown was now sitting in the chair behind her bed. Not taking it anymore, I decided to call the kid's mother. I dialed the number with anticipation as I didn't know what she would say. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up. below," I said. "There is a clown in your daughter's room that I cannot look at anymore. Do you mind if I move it into a spare room until tomorrow or when you get back?" I asked. What she told me next had shivers traveling down my spine. I could not believe what she had just told me. I hung up the phone and ran back down to my best friend. She saw the look on my face as I had went white as a ghost. "Whatever is the matter?" she asked me. I explained to her that I had rang up the mother and asked her if I could move the clown out of the little girl's bedroom as it was scaring me. I also explained that the mother told me that they don't have a clown and that I must get the kids ASAP and go round to the next door neighbors and call the police imminently. I could see all the blood drain from her face. "You grab the twins and I will get the little girl," I told her as we both ran upstairs. The friend continued to collect the twins while I stood outside the little girl's room with my heart now in my throat. Although I was only standing there for a few seconds, I did feel like hours had gone past. Thought ran through my mind. What if he grabbed me or the little girl, I thought. What if I had to fight him? Putting the thoughts to the back of my mind, I cautiously proceeded into her room. I continuously watched the clown as I woke up the little girl and told her to come with me. I met up with my friend at the bottom of the stairs. She still had the ghostly look on her face. I could tell she was panicking but trying to hide it for the sake of the children. I grabbed the keys of the side table and quickly but with a struggle unlocked the front door. As quick as we could, we ran towards the neighbor's house, all while checking behind us, making sure this imposter was not following us. It seemed like a lifetime to get round to the neighbors. They only lived a few yards next door too. Out of breath, I banged on the door waiting for them to open. A sweet old lady opened the door, seeing the pale on our faces and the kids in our arms. "What on earth is wrong?" she asked as we stood there breathless. "I am babysitting next door and there is a man dressed in a clown outfit in the little girl's room," I told her, trying to catch a breath. She looked at me, my friend and the kids and rushed all into her house. It was the kind of house you would expect for someone of her age. Photos of all her kids and grandkids, antique furniture everywhere. She struggled to the phone and called up the police. I was hoping for a quick response as I did not this perpetrator to show up at the house and hurt this little old lady. The police showed up pretty fast and in numbers. There must have been the whole station that showed up. 5 cars pulled up to the house and surrounded the house while 2 others came to this house. We met up with him outside the house. We started to tell him the whole story while he calmed us down. A few moments later, the police inside the house came out with a clown in handcuffs. The policeman in front of me told me that we are all safe now and if we wanted to, we could wait in the car. The old lady, however, stated that we could wait with her while the parents was on their way home. An hour passed and the parents show up with police still in their garden. One of the officers pointed her in our direction while her husband talked to the cop. She came over to the house and gave all the kids a huge hug. The way she hugged them seemed that she had not seen them in some time. She thanked me for calling her in time and saving her children. Another hour later and a nice policeman drove me and my friend back to my house. Back at my house, I decided to tell my parents what had happened at the house. They was in shock, as was I. They could not believe what had happened. They both took hold of me and hugged me so hard I could not breathe. "Easy," I told them as I gasped for air from their grips. The next day, while eating breakfast, we watched the morning news channel to see if there was anything about this clown. It seemed that there was. The clown was an escaped convict from a mental institute in the next town. He had broken out and wanted to continue with his life of crime, murdering people. I was really happy that day that I contacted the kid's mother. If I had not, then things could be very different right now. This all brings a lesson. If you see something that you are not sure about, even at someone else's house, then don't be afraid to confront them about it. It could one day save your life. There are creatures of myth out there that you would want to stay away from. These creatures comes from the thing of nightmares and will truly haunt your dreams, having you wake up in a cold sweat. So with that in mind, here is the top 5 urban mythical creatures that will haunt your dreams. 5. The Chupacabra. Chupacabra, translated as goatsucker, is a reptile-like creature, said to have leathery or scaly greenish skin and sharp spines or quills running down its back. It is said to be approximately 3 to 4 feet high and stands and hops in a fashion similar to that of a kangaroo. The first reported attack occurred in March 1995 in Puerto Rico. 8 sheep were discovered dead, each with 3 puncture wounds in 3 chest area and completely drained of blood. So a vampire-type creature, that can sneak up behind you, without you knowing, and suck all your blood out. Definitely not something I would like to see in my dreams. 4. The Banshee. There are many varying descriptions of the Banshee. Sometimes she has long streaming hair and wears a gray cloak over a green dress, and her eyes are red from continual weeping. She may even be dressed in white with red hair and a ghastly complexion. Sometimes the Banshee assumes the form of some sweet-singing virgin of the family who died young, and has been given the mission by invisible powers to become the harbinger of coming doom to her mortal kindred. The Uabrian Banshee is thought to be named Abel and the ruler of 25 other Banshees who would always be at her attendance. It is possible that this possible story is the source of the idea that the wailing or numerous banshees signifies the death of a great person. When several banshees appear at once, it indicates the death of a great or holy person. The tale sometimes recounted that the woman, though called a fairy, was a ghost, often of a specified murdered woman, or a mother who died in childbirth. So hearing the wailing of the nearby banshee that no one else can hear is not my idea of a great night or day. 3. The Headless Horseman. The Headless Horseman is traditionally depicted as a man upon his horse missing his head. Depending on the legend, the horseman is either carrying his head, or missing his head altogether, and searching for it. The legend of the Headless Horseman begins in Sleepy Hollow, New York, during the American Revolutionary War. Tradition folklore holds that the horseman was a Hessian artilleryman who was killed during the Battle of White Plains, Indiana 1776. He was decapitated by an American cannonball, and the shattered remains of his head were left on the battlefield while his comrades hastily carried his body away. In myth, the horseman is known to ride along the streets looking out for any person that may be around. There he would chop off the head of his victim, where he would then put the severed head upon his own shoulders and disappear into the night, all while looking for his next victim. I don't know about you, but I am keen on keeping my head on my shoulders. Mind having a ghostly man keeping it on his. 2. The Wendigo. The Wendigo is a mythical cannibal monster or evil spirit native to the northern forests of the Atlantic coast and Great Lakes region of both the United States and Canada. The Wendigo may appear as a monster with some characteristics of a human, or as a spirit who has possessed a human being and may then become monstrous. It is historically associated with cannibalism, murder, insatiable greed, and the cultural taboos against such behaviors. In some traditions, humans who become overpowered by greed could turn into Wendigos. The myth thus served as a method of encouraging cooperation and moderation. Humans can also turn into Wendigos by being in contact with them for too long. The Wendigo was gaunt to the point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tightly over its bones. With its bones pushing out against its skin, its complexion the ash gray of death, and its eyes pushed back deep into their sockets. The Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. Yikes, definitely not a creature you would want to stalk you when alone in the forests. 1. The Thunderbird. The Thunderbird's a legendary creature in certain North American indigenous peoples' history and culture. It is considered a supernatural being of power and strength. It is especially important, and frequently depicted, in the art, songs and oral histories of many Pacific Northwest coast cultures, but is also found in various forms among some peoples of the American Southwest, East Coast of the United States, Great Lakes, and Great Plains. The Thunderbird controls the upper world while the underworld is controlled by the underwater panther or great horned serpent. The Thunderbird throws lightning at the underwater creatures and creates thunder by flapping its wings. Thunderbirds in tradition are commonly depicted as having an X-shape appearance. Well, seeing the Thunderbird and the underwater creatures in a battle would be glorious, but being anywhere near the battle is not a place I would want to be. Think, all that lightning being thrown around is sure you will be struck and dead. There are creatures of myth out there that you would want to stay away from. These creatures comes from the thing of nightmares and will truly haunt your dreams, having you wake up in a cold sweat. So with that in mind, here is the top 5 urban mythical creatures that will haunt your dreams. 5. The Chupacabra. Chupacabra, translated as goatsucker, is a reptile-like creature, said to have leathery or scaly greenish skin and sharp spines or quills running down its back. It is said to be approximately 3 to 4 feet high and stands and hops in a fashion similar to that of a kangaroo. The first reported attack occurred in March 1995 in Puerto Rico. 8 sheep were discovered dead, each with 3 puncture wounds in 3 chest area and completely drained of blood. So a vampire-type creature, that can sneak up behind you, without you knowing, and suck all your blood out. Definitely not something I would like to see in my dreams. 4. The Banshee. There are many varying descriptions of the Banshee. Sometimes she has long streaming hair and wears a gray cloak over a green dress, and her eyes are red from continual weeping. She may even be dressed in white with red hair and a ghastly complexion. Sometimes the Banshee assumes the form of some sweet-singing virgin of the family who died young, and has been given the mission by invisible powers to become the harbinger of coming doom to her mortal kindred. The Uabrian Banshee is thought to be named Abel and the ruler of 25 other Banshees who would always be at her attendance. It is possible that this possible story is the source of the idea that the wailing or numerous banshees signifies the death of a great person. When several banshees appear at once, it indicates the death of a great or holy person. The tale sometimes recounted that the woman, though called a fairy, was a ghost, often of a specified murdered woman, or a mother who died in childbirth. So hearing the wailing of the nearby banshee that no one else can hear is not my idea of a great night or day. 3. The Headless Horseman. The Headless Horseman is traditionally depicted as a man upon his horse missing his head. Depending on the legend, the horseman is either carrying his head, or missing his head altogether, and searching for it. The legend of the Headless Horseman begins in Sleepy Hollow, New York, during the American Revolutionary War. Tradition folklore holds that the horseman was a Hessian artilleryman who was killed during the Battle of White Plains, Indiana 1776. He was decapitated by an American cannonball, and the shattered remains of his head were left on the battlefield while his comrades hastily carried his body away. In myth, the horseman is known to ride along the streets looking out for any person that may be around. There he would chop off the head of his victim, where he would then put the severed head upon his own shoulders and disappear into the night, all while looking for his next victim. I don't know about you, but I am keen on keeping my head on my shoulders. Mind having a ghostly man keeping it on his, too. The Wendigo. The Wendigo is a mythical cannibal monster or evil spirit native to the northern forests of the Atlantic coast and Great Lakes region of both the United States and Canada. The Wendigo may appear as a monster with some characteristics of a human, or as a spirit who has possessed a human being and may then become monstrous. It is historically associated with cannibalism, murder, insatiable greed, and the cultural taboos against such behaviors. In some traditions, humans who become overpowered by greed could turn into Wendigos. The myth thus served as a method of encouraging cooperation and moderation. Humans can also turn into Wendigos by being in contact with them for too long. The Wendigo was gaunt to the point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tightly over its bones. With its bones pushing out against its skin, its complexion the ash gray of death, and its eyes pushed back deep into their sockets. The Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. Yikes, definitely not a creature you would want to stalk you when alone in the forests. 1. The Thunderbird. The Thunderbird's a legendary creature in certain North American indigenous peoples' history and culture. It is considered a supernatural being of power and strength. It is especially important, and frequently depicted, in the art, songs and oral histories of many Pacific Northwest coast cultures, but is also found in various forms among some peoples of the American Southwest, East Coast of the United States, Great Lakes, and Great Plains. The Thunderbird controls the upper world while the underworld is controlled by the underwater panther or great horned serpent. The Thunderbird throws lightning at the underwater creatures and creates thunder by flapping its wings. Thunderbirds in tradition are commonly depicted as having an X-shaped appearance. Well, Seeing the Thunderbird and the underwater creatures in a battle would be glorious, but being anywhere near the battle is not a place I would want to be. Think, all that lightning being thrown around is sure you will be struck and dead.
Hey guys, and welcome to another Urban Reads and Stories video. Today's video is all about those terrifying urban legends we have all heard of and hate to happen to us. This is 5 terrifying urban legends. For years, kids living in and around Staten Island raised goosebumps by relating the tale of Cropsey, a boogeyman who lived in the woods and made a nocturnal habit of disemboweling children. Parents no doubt eased their kids' fears by telling them no such monster existed. But he did. In 1987, Andre Rand was put on trial and convicted for a child abduction. Rand, it turned out, may have been connected to a rash of child disappearances in the 1970s. He had once worked at Willowbrook, a defunct mental institution. While he denies involvement in other cases, it's clear Rand's activities had a heavy influence in the word-of-mouth stories that followed. Vintage video games have long traded stories about a coin-operated arcade game circa early 1980s Portland that had strange effects on its players. The game, titled Polybius, was alleged to have prompted feelings of disorientation, amnesia, game addiction, and even suicide. The machine's cabinet was said to be painted entirely black, and it was rumored that stern-looking men would sometimes visit arcades to collect information from the machine before disappearing. Was it a CIA experiment spun up from MK Ultra, the psychoactive drug study conducted on unsuspecting subjects? While the entire story doesn't hold up to scrutiny, individual pieces are actually based in fact. Brian Dunning, host of Skeptiad podcast, did some investigative work and found that a 12-year-old named Brian Morrow had become sickened during a 28-hour marathon video game contest in Portland in 1981. Just a few days later, Portland area arcades were raided by federal agents, who seized cabinets that were being used for gambling. Coupled with the existence of a real arcade game called Polyplay, these memories seem to amalgamate into the Polybius legend. You stagger into the bathroom at 3 a.m. to relieve yourself. Groggy you with sleep, you lift the lid and position yourself over the toilet. You hear splashing. Turning on the light, you see a rat looking back at you from the bowl. You're never the same again. Urban legends about animals in sewers have been a staple of scary stories, particularly the one about baby alligators being flushed down toilets and then growing to adult size in waste channels. Most often told in New York. But finding a rodent in your toilet, inches from very vulnerable areas of your body, is particular kind of domestic terror, and one that happens to be possible. Drain plumbing for toilets is typically 3 inches in diameter or more, plenty of space for a rat to climb up. The animals are attracted to sewage lines due to undigested food in feces and can travel through pipes before emerging through an opening and into your bathroom. And yes, rats can be somewhat testy when they complete their journey. One aquatic rodent bit the rump of a female victim in Petersburg, Virginia in 1999. In Seattle, the issue is common enough that public officials have given advice on what to do in case you encounter one: close the lid and flush. If you lived in or around Virginia in the 1970s, you were probably exposed to the story of the Bunny Man. In the tale, an escaped mental patient takes to gutting bunnies and hanging them from a bridge underpass. Later, the maniac is said to have graduated to gutting and hanging teens in a similar manner. Locals were cautioned to never be caught near the underpass, which is now known to most people as Bunny Man Bridge, on Halloween night. This story likely spawned from the very real presence of a roving madman in the area. In October 1970, a couple reported seeing a man dressed in a wild suit and wearing bunny ears who began yelling at them that they were on private land. To punctuate his point, he threw a hatchet at their windscreen, apparently shattering it. There was a second sighting of Bunny Man 2 weeks later, when a security guard spotted a hatchet-wielding man chipping away at a porch railing. Police tried, unsuccessfully, to locate then man. While he didn't disembowel anyone, the thought of an adult wielding both a hatchet and a pair of rabbit ears somehow manages to be just as disturbing. Imagine finding yourself outside and alone in the dark on a residential street. You hear footsteps approaching. Suddenly, a man with a misshapen face appears. You run, terrified beyond words. You spread the story of the man with no face throughout Pennsylvania. Charlie, No Face was actually a man named Ray Robinson, and he was no figment of anyone's imagination. Born in 1910, Robinson was disfigured as the result of an electrical accident at the age of 8. He touched active wires, which effectively maimed him. Knowing his appearance could be disconcerting, Robinson took to taking strolls after dark. He often walked a path along Route 351 in Beaver County. While his inevitably led to spreading stories about a boogeyman haunting the town. He died in '85.
Just before dawn, on the outskirts of New York Harbor, a small sloop sailed listlessly into the bay. The ship had no crew, no lights, and a deck covered in blood. It presented a mystery to the local police, who set their detectives on the case, which led to a manhunt up the east coast of the United States in pursuit of a phantom. The police may have had a description, a name, but they had no idea of the monster they would find at the end of the trail. More than a phantom, they were chasing a legend, a man who would later become whispered about in taverns as the last pirate of New York. Albert W. Hicks, also known as Elias W. Hicks, William Johnson, John Hicks, and Pirate Hicks, was a triple murderer, and one of the last people executed for piracy in the United States. Cultural historian Rich Cohen places him as the first New York City legendary gangster figure, a bridge between the piracy of old and rise of a new gangster nation. According to Hicks' testimony, he was born in 1820 in Foster, Rhode Island. His father was a farmer who had 7 sons, of whom Hicks was the second youngest. He was known to be headstrong and a fighter. He never attended school and worked on the farm until age 15 when he ran away to Norwich, Connecticut, where he began a life of crime. Arrested for theft, he was put into jail. Biographer Rich Cohen suggests it wouldn't have been uncommon for a teenage runaway to be buggered by older inmates. Hicks escaped a number of times, but he was reapprehended and given increasingly severe sentences, including a year in solitary where Hicks said he went a little crazy. He swore vengeance against the whole human race. The account given by Hicks for the next 20 years is murder and mayhem on the high seas, the goldfields of California, throughout South America, Mexico, the South Pacific, and the Atlantic Trade Triangle. Ship mutinies and highway robberies were his main occupation. It is possible that Hicks killed hundreds of people. He and an accomplice typically killed their victims and stayed on the move, spending money on alcohol, prostitutes, and fine clothes until it ran out. He was a known raconteur, and when his confessions were published, the New York Times raised some doubt about their accuracy, but modern biographer Rich Cohen said there was evidence to support at least some of the stories. Hicks eventually washed up in New York City, at the age of 40, with a newly married wife who knew nothing of his criminal past and a young child to support. Needing money for his family, he turned to the skills he knew best. Hicks hired on as a deckhand with the oyster sloop A.E. Johnson out of New York City, which he knew to be carrying a large amount of cash for buying oysters in Virginia to be transported back to New York. There were 4 men on the boat, including Captain George H. Burr, brothers Oliver and Smith Watts, and Hicks. It was nighttime as the boat neared the Narrows. Captain Burr and Oliver retired to their quarters to sleep. Smith had night duty and Hicks joined him on deck, politely taking a turn on the wheel. Hicks saw something and pointed it out to Smith, asking what it was. Smith didn't see anything. Hicks said, "Look again." Smith turned his back. Hicks grabbed a sea axe and struck a blow to the back of Smith's head, felling him to the deck. Hearing the commotion, Oliver Watts stuck his neck out through the cabin hatchway. Hicks struck again, decapitating Watts. Hicks recalled that the body slowly sagged downward and the head rolled onto the deck, now sprayed with the blood of 2 brothers. Hicks carried the bloodied axe into Captain Burr's cabin, who was by now alert. The captain was a tall, strong man and the ensuing fight lasted a while, with Burr almost strangling Hicks to death. Eventually, Hicks managed to slash the captain with the axe, slicing off half his face, including an eyeball and nose left hanging on the axe blade. Exhausted from the struggle of killing Burr, Hicks searched the living quarters for loot. When Hicks returned onto the deck, he saw a movement and was shocked to see Smith on his feet moving towards him. He believed it might be an apparition. Hicks forced the injured man overboard, but Smith grasped a rail and hung on with a death grip. Hicks swung the axe and chopped off his fingers, which fell onto the deck. The rest of Smith slipped into the water. Hicks threw the other bodies and the axe overboard. The A.E. Johnson had been running unattended and struck another ship, the schooner J.R. Mather, breaking the Johnson's mainmast and bringing down her rigging. Hicks set out to sink the ship, with the evidence of the killings, by drilling a handful of holes through the keel. He then took the money, about $230, and the possessions of the murdered crew, and abandoned ship in a yawl, rowing for shore and landing about daybreak next to a farmer's field on Staten Island just above Fort Richmond, Battery Weed. Believing that he would not be caught, he made his way back home to Manhattan, stopping at saloons merrily drinking and making a spectacle of himself. When the abandoned but still afloat A.E. Johnson was discovered the next day by the Coast Guard, they found the deck and cabin bathed in blood, including inexplicably a set of severed fingers. The city was shocked by the gruesome scene and intrigued by the mystery of what happened. Police detectives could see that a yawl was missing and began a search for it. After a few days, a local boy led them to where it had been abandoned in some rushes. They began following a chain of witnesses who had seen a strange man carrying a large heavy sea bag. The detectives followed witness sightings all the way back to an apartment in Manhattan. Hicks learned the police were on his trail through newspaper reports and fled the city. Detectives had by now determined Hicks' identity, and they continued to follow a chain of witnesses who remembered a large man with a wife and small child taking trains and boats northward. When police found the last witness to see him, a cabbie who took Hicks to a boarding home outside Providence, Rhode Island, they surrounded the house in the middle of the night and took him captive in bed without a fight. They found in his possession Captain Burr's watch, several money bags, and a daguerreotype belonging to Watts, among other damning evidence. When the abandoned but still afloat A.E. Johnson was discovered the next day by the Coast Guard, they found the deck and cabin bathed in blood, including inexplicably a set of severed fingers. The city was shocked by the gruesome scene and intrigued by the mystery of what happened. Police detectives could see that a yawl was missing and began a search for it. After a few days, a local boy led them to where it had been abandoned in some rushes. They began following a chain of witnesses who had seen a strange man carrying a large heavy sea bag. The detectives followed witness sightings all the way back to an apartment in Manhattan. Hicks learned the police were on his trail through newspaper reports and fled the city. Detectives had by now determined Hicks' identity, and they continued to follow a chain of witnesses who remembered a large man with a wife and small child taking trains and boats northward. When police found the last witness to see him, a cabbie who took Hicks to a boarding home outside Providence, Rhode Island, they surrounded the house in the middle of the night and took him captive in bed without a fight. They found in his possession Captain Burr's watch, several money bags, and a daguerreotype belonging to Watts, among other damning evidence. Hicks soon became a legend in the New York underworld, with the help of showman P.T. Barnum. Barnum had met Hicks in prison and made a deal that would allow Barnum to take a death mask while he was still alive. In return, Barnum would give Hicks a new set of clothes, the electric blue suit he wore for the execution. Barnum used the casting to create a full-size wax statue of Hicks wearing the same clothes as when he committed the murders. The wax likeness was displayed for 10 years and seen by millions of visitors before it melted in a museum fire. Biographer Rich Cohen argues that Hicks originated a gangster clothing fashion that can still be seen in art and real life. The Hicks look of a Kossuth hat pulled low over one eye, long-tailed monkey jacket, and pumped footwear were displayed at the Barnum Wax Figure Museum, where millions saw a very bad but handsome man. This style passed from gangster to gangster and through generations as a sort of badge of association with legends of the past, eventually reaching Hollywood films of the 1930s and broader culture to the present. Hicks was hanged on Friday the 13th. There is some speculation Hicks originated or helped solidify a superstition of the day's ill luck, though there are other theories. His name became a slang gambling phrase, meaning 6 on a pair of dice, rhymes with Hicks. Henry Sherman Backus, an itinerant composer of murder ballads that romanticized crimes, dedicated a ballad titled Hicks the Pirate, sung to the traditional Irish tune The Rose Tree. Irish singer-songwriter Vincent Cross recorded a modern take on the 1860 ballad for his album The Life and Times of James the Rooster Corcoran, 2020, titled Albert W. Hicks. 8-9. The execution of Albert Hicks is dramatized in Chapter 18 of McKinley Cantor's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel Andersonville, 1955. Hicks was portrayed as a wax figure in the Twilight Zone episode The New Exhibit. In the show, wax figures in a museum come to life and commit murders when they learn their exhibit is to be shut down. Hicks is accurately dressed in a Kossuth hat and carries a sea axe. He is portrayed by the American actor, Bob Mitchell. Billy the Kid, born Henry McCarty, also known by the pseudonym William H. Bonney, was an Irish-American outlaw and gunfighter of the American Old West who killed 8 men before he was shot and killed at the age of 21. He also fought in New Mexico's Lincoln County War, during which he allegedly committed 3 murders. McCarty was orphaned at the age of 15. His first arrest for stealing food, at the age of 16, in late 1975. 10 days later, he robbed a Chinese laundry and was again arrested, but escaped shortly afterward. He fled from New Mexico Territory into neighboring Arizona Territory, making him both an outlaw and a federal fugitive. In 1877, McCarty began to refer to himself as William H. Bonney. 2 different versions of a wanted poster dated September 23, 1875, refer him to as William Wright, better known as Billy the Kid. After murdering a blacksmith during an altercation in August 1877, McCarty became a wanted man in Arizona and returned to New Mexico, where he joined a group of cattle rustlers. He became well known in the region when he joined the Regulators and took part in the Lincoln County War of 1978. McCarty and 2 other Regulators were later charged with killing 3 men, including Lincoln County Sheriff William J. Brady and one of his deputies. McCarty's notoriety grew in December 1880 when the Las Vegas Gazette in Las Vegas, New Mexico, and the Sun in New York City carried stories about his crimes. Sheriff Pat Garrett captured McCarty later that month. In April 1881, McCarty was tried and convicted of Brady's murder and was sentenced to hang in May of that year. He escaped from jail on April 28, killing 2 more sheriff's deputies in the process and evading capture for more than 2 months. Garrett shot and killed McCarty, by then 21, in Fort Summerall on July 14, 1881. During the following decades, legends grew that McCarty had survived, and a number of men claimed to be him. Billy the Kid remains one of the most notorious figures from the era, whose life and likeness have been frequently dramatized in Western popular culture. Henry McCarty was born to parents of Irish Catholic ancestry, Catherine and Patrick McCarty, in New York City. While his birth year has been confirmed as 1859, the exact date has been disputed as either September 17 or November 23 of that year. A letter from an official of St. Peter's Church in the Manhattan states it is in possession of records showing McCarty was baptized there on September 28, 1863. Following the death of her husband Patrick, Catherine McCarty and her sons moved to Indianapolis, Indiana, where she met William Henry Harrison Antrim. The McCarty family moved from Antrim to Wichita, Kansas, in 1870. After moving again a few years later, Catherine married Antrim on March 1, 1873, at the First Presbyterian Church in Santa Fe, New Mexico City Territory. McCarty and his brother Joseph were witnesses to the ceremony. Shortly afterward, the family moved from the Santa Fe to Silver City, New Mexico, and Joseph McCarty began using the name, Joseph Antrim. Shortly before McCarty's mother, Catherine, died of tuberculosis, then called consumption, on September 16, 1874, McCarty's stepfather, William Antrim, abandoned the family, leaving both McCarty boys orphans. McCarty was 15 years old when his mother died. Sarah Brown, the owner of a boarding house, gave him room and board in exchange for work. On September 16, 1875, McCarty was caught stealing food. 10 days later, McCarty and George Schaefer robbed a Chinese laundry, stealing clothing and 2 pistols. McCarty was charged with theft and was jailed. He escaped 2 days later and became a fugitive, as reported in the Silver City Herald the next day, the first story published about him. McCarty located his stepfather and stayed with him until Antrim threw him out. McCarty stole clothing and guns from him. It was the last time the two saw each other. After leaving Antrim, McCarty traveled to southeastern Arizona Territory, where he worked as a ranch hand and gambled his wages in nearby gaming houses. In 1876, he was hired as a ranch hand by well-known Henry Hooker. During this time, McCarty became acquainted with John R. Mackey, a Scottish-born criminal and former U.S. cavalry private who, following his discharge, remained near the U.S. Army post at Camp Grant. The two men soon began stealing horses from local soldiers. McCarty became known as Kid Antrim because of his youth, slight build, clean-shaven appearance, and personality. On August 17, 1877, McCarty was at a saloon in the village of Bonita when he got into an argument with Francis P. Windy Cahill, a blacksmith who reportedly had bullied McCarty in turn called Cahill a sons of a bitch, whereupon Cahill threw McCarty to the floor and the two struggled for McCarty's revolver. McCarty shot and mortally wounded Cahill. A witness said McCarty has no choice, he had to use his equalizer. Cahill died the following day. McCarty fled but returned a few days later and was apprehended by Miles Wood, the local justice of the peace. McCarty was detained and held in the Camp Grant guardhouse but escaped before law enforcement could arrive. McCarty stole a horse and fled Arizona Territory for New Mexico Territory, but Apaches took the horse from him, leaving him to walk many miles to the nearest settlement. At Fort Stanton in the Pecos Valley, McCarty, starving and near death, went to the home of a friend and Seven Rivers Warriors gang member John Jones, whose mother Barbara nursed him back to health. After regaining his health, McCarty went to Apache Tajo, a former Army post, where he joined a band of rustlers who raided herds owned by cattle magnate John Chisholm in Lincoln County. After McCarty was spotted in Silver City, his involvement with the gang was mentioned in local newspapers. At some point in 1877, McCarty began to refer to himself by the name William H. Bonney. After returning to New Mexico, McCarty worked as a cowboy for English businessman and rancher John Henry Tunstall, near the Rio Felix, a tributary of the Rio Grande, in Lincoln County. Tunstall and his business partner and lawyer Alexander Lawrence Murphy, James Dolan, and John Riley. The three men had wielded an economic and political hold over Lincoln County since the early 1970s, due in part to their ownership of a beef contract with nearby Fort Stanton and a well-patronized dry goods store in the town of Lincoln. By February 1878, McCarty owed £8,000 to Dolan, who obtained a court order and asked Lincoln County Sheriff William J. Brady to attack nearly $40,000 worth of Tunstall's property and livestock. Tunstall put Bonney in charge of non-prime horses and told him to relocate them to his ranch for safekeeping. Meanwhile, Sheriff Brady assembled a large posse to seize Tunstall's cattle. On February 18, 1878, Tunstall learned of the posse's presence on his land and rose out to intervene. During the encounter, one member of the posse shot Tunstall in the chest, knocking him off his horse. Another posse member took at Tunstall's gun and killed him with a shot to the back of his head. Tunstall's mother ignited the conflict between the two factions that became known as the Lincoln County War. After Tunstall was killed, McCarty and Dick Brewer swore affidavits against Brady and those in his posse, and obtained murder warrants from Lincoln County Justice of the Peace John B. Wilson. On February 20, 1878, while attempting to arrest Brady, the sheriff and his deputies found and arrested McCarty and two other men riding with him. Deputy U.S. Marshal Robert Weidenman, a friend of McCarty, and a detachment of soldiers captured Sheriff Brady's jail guards, put them behind bars, and released Bonney and Brewer. McCarty then joined the Lincoln County Regulators. On March 9 they captured Frank Baker and William Morton, both of whom were accused of killing Tunstall. Baker and Morton were killed while allegedly trying to escape. On April 1, the Regulators ambushed Sheriff Brady and his deputies. McCarty was wounded in the thigh during the battle. Brady and Deputy Sheriff George W. Hindman were killed. On the morning of April 4, 1878, Buckshot Roberts and Dick Brewer were killed during a shootout at Blazer's Mill. Warrants were issued for several participants on both sides, and McCarty and two others were charged with killing Brady, Hindman, and Roberts. On the night of Sunday, July 14th, McSween and the regulators, now a group of 50 or 60 men, went to Lincoln and stationed themselves in the town among several buildings. At the McSween residence were McCarty, Florencio Chavez, Jose Chavez y Chavez, Jim French, Harvey Morris, Tom O'Folliard, and Gino Salazar, among others. Another group led by Marin Chavez and Doc Skurlock positioned themselves on the roof of a saloon. Henry Newton Brown, Dick Smith, and George Coe defended a nearby adobe bunkhouse. On Tuesday, July 16th, newly appointed Sheriff George Pepin sent sharpshooters to kill the McSween defenders at the saloon. Pepin's men retreated when one of the snipers, Charles Crawford, was killed by Fernando Herrera. Pepin then sent a request for assistance to Colonel Nathan Dudley, commandant of nearby Fort Stanton. In a reply to Pepin, Dudley refused to intervene but later arrived in Lincoln with troops, turning the battle in favor of the Murphy-Dolan faction. A shooting war broke out on Friday, July 19th. McSween supporters gathered inside his house. When Buck Powell and Deputy Sheriff Jack Long set fire to the building, the occupants began shooting. McCarty and the other men fled the building when all rooms but one were burning. During the confusion, Alexander McSween was shot and killed by Robert W. Beckwith, who was then shot and killed by McCarty. McCarty and 3 other survivors of the Battle of Lincoln were near the Mescalero Indian Agency when the agency bookkeeper, Morris Bernstein, was murdered on August 5, 1878. All 4 were indicted for the murder, despite conflicting evidence that Bernstein had been killed by Constable Ignacio Martinez. All of the indictments, except McCarty's, were later quashed. On October 5, 1878, U.S. Marshal John Sherman informed newly appointed territorial governor and former Union Army General Lew Wallace that he held warrants for several men, including William H. Antrim, alias Kid, alias Bonnie, but was unable to execute them owing to the disturbed condition of affairs in that county, resulting from acts of a desperate class of men. Wallace issued an amnesty proclamation on November 13, 1878, which pardoned anyone involved in the Lincoln County War since Tunstall's murder. It specifically excluded persons who had been convicted of or indicted for a crime, and therefore excluded McCarty. On February 18, 1879, McCarty and friend Tom O'Folliard were in Lincoln and watched as attorney Houston Chapman was shot and his corpse set on fire. According to eyewitnesses, the pair were innocent bystanders forced at gunpoint by Jesse Evans to witness the murder. McCarty wrote to Governor Wallace on March 13, 1879, with an offer to provide information of the Chapman murder in exchange for amnesty. On March 15 Governor Wallace replied, agreeing to a secret meeting to discuss the situation. McCarty met with Wallace in Lincoln on March 17, 1879. During the meeting and subsequent correspondence, Wallace promised McCarty protection from his enemies and clemency if he would offer his testimony to a grand jury. On March 20, Wallace wrote to McCarty, to remove all suspicion of understanding, I think it better to put the arresting party in charge of Sheriff Kimbrell, who shall be instructed to see that no violence is used. McCarty responded on the same day, agreeing to testify and confirming Wallace's proposal for his arrest and detention in a local jail to assure his safety. On March 21, McCarty let himself be captured by a posse led by Sheriff George Kimball of Lincoln County. As agreed, McCarty provided a statement about Chapman's murder and testified in court. However, after McCarty's testimony, the local district attorney refused to set him free. Still in custody several weeks later, McCarty began to suspect Wallace had used subterfuge and would never grant him amnesty. McCarty escaped from the Lincoln County Jail on June 17, 1879. McCarty avoided further violence until January 10, 1880, when he shot and killed Joe Grant, a newcomer to the area, at Hargrove Saloon in Fort Sumner, New Mexico. According to contemporary sources, McCarty had been warned Grant intended to kill him. He walked up to Grant, told him he admired his revolver, and asked to examine it. Grant handed it over. Before returning the pistol, which he noticed contained only 3 cartridges. McCarty positioned the cylinders so the next hammerfall would land on an empty chamber. Grant suddenly pointed his pistol at McCarty's face and pulled the trigger. When it failed to fire, McCarty drew his own weapon and shot Grant in the head. A reporter for the Las Vegas Optic quoted McCarty as saying the encounter was a game of 2 and I got there first. In 1880, McCarty formed a friendship with a rancher named Jim Greathouse, who later introduced him to Dave Rudabaugh. On November 29, 1880, McCarty, Rudabaugh, and Billy Wilson ran from a posse led by Sheriff's Deputy James Carlisle. Cornered at Greathouse's ranch, McCarty told the posse they were holding Greathouse as a hostage. Carlisle offered to exchange places with Greathouse, and McCarty accepted the offer. Carlisle later attempted to escape by jumping through a window, but he was shot 3 times and killed. The shootout ended in a standoff. The posse withdrew and McCarty, Rudabaugh, and Wilson rode away. A few weeks later, after the Greathouse incident, McCarty, Rudabaugh, O'Folliard, Charlie Bouger, and Tom Pickett rode into Fort Summer. Unbeknownst to McCarty and his companions, a posse led by Parr Garrett was waiting for them. The posse opened fire, killing O'Folliard. The rest of the outlaws escaped unharmed. On December 13, 1880, Governor Wallace posted a $500 bounty for McCarty capture. Pat Garrett continued his search for McCarty. On December 23, following the siege in which Bouger was killed, Garrett and his posse captured McCarty along with Pickett, Rudabaugh, and Wilson at Stinking Springs. The prisoners, including McCarty, were shackled and taken to Fort Summer, then later to Las Vegas, New Mexico. When they arrived on December 26, they were met by crowds of curious onlookers. The following day, an armed mob gathered at the train depot before the prisoners, who were already on board the train with Garrett, departed for Santa Fe. Deputy Sheriff Romero, backed by the angry group of men, demanded custody of Dave Rudabaugh, who during an unsuccessful escape attempt on April 5, 1880, shot and killed Deputy Antonio Lino Valdez in the process. Garrett refused to surrender the prisoner, and a tense confrontation ensued until he agreed to let the sheriff and 2 other men accompany the party to Santa Fe, where they would petition the governor to release Rudabaugh to them. In a later interview with a reporter, McCarty said he was unafraid during the incident, saying, "If I only had my Winchester I'd lick the whole crowd." The Las Vegas Gazette ran a story from a jailhouse interview following McCarty's capture. When the report said Bonnie appeared relaxed, he replied, "What's the use of looking on the gloomy side of everything? The laugh's on me this time." During his short career as an outlaw, McCarty was the subject of numerous U.S. newspaper articles, some as far away as New York. After arriving at Santa Fe, McCarty, seeking clemency, sent Governor Wallace 4 letters over the next 3 months. Wallace refused to intervene, and McCarty went to trial in April 1881 in Mesilla, New Mexico. Following 2 days of testimony, McCarty was found guilty of Sheriff Brady's murder. It was the only conviction secured against any of the combatants in the Lincoln County War. On April 13, Judge Warren Bristol sentenced McCarty to hang, with his execution scheduled for May 13, 1881. According to legend, upon sentencing, the judge told McCarty he was going to hang until he was dead, dead, dead. McCarty's response was, "You can go to hell, hell, hell." According to the historical record, he did not speak after the reading of his sentence. Following his sentence, McCarty was moved to Lincoln, where he was held under guard on the top floor of the town courthouse. On the evening of April 28, 1881, while Garrett was in White Oaks collecting taxes, Deputy Bob Ollinger took 5 other prisoners across the street for a meal, leaving James Bell, another deputy, alone with McCarty at the jail. McCarty asked to be taken outside to use the outhouse behind the courthouse. On their return to the jail, McCarty, who was walking ahead of Bell up the stairs to his cell, hid around a blind corner, slipped out of his handcuffs and beat Bell with the loose end of the cuffs. During the ensuing scuffle, McCarty grabbed Bell's revolver and fatally shot him in the back as Bell tried to get away. McCarty, with his legs still shackled, broke into Garrett's office and took a loaded shotgun left behind by Ollinger. McCarty waited at the upstairs window for Linder to respond to the gunshot that killed Bell and called out to him, "Look up, old boy, and see what you get." When Ollinger looked up, Bonney shot and killed him. After about an hour, McCarty freed himself from the leg irons with an axe. He obtained a horse and rode out of town. According to some stories, he was singing as he left Lincoln. While McCarty was on the run, Governor Wallace placed a new $500 bounty on the fugitive's head. Almost 3 months after his escape, Garrett, responding to rumor that McCarty was in the vicinity of Fort Summer, left Lincoln with 2 deputies on July 14, 1881, to question resident Pete Maxwell, a friend of McCarty's. Maxwell, son of land baron Lucien Maxwell, spoke with Garrett the same day for several hours. Around midnight, the pair sat in Maxwell's darkened bedroom when McCarty unexpectedly entered. Accounts vary. After the shooting, a local justice of the peace assembled a coroner's jury of 6 people. The jury members interviewed Maxwell and Garrett, and McCarty's body and the location of the shooting were examined. The jury certified the body of McCarty and, according to a local newspaper, the jury foreman said, "It was the kid's body that we examined. McCarty was given awake by candlelight. He was buried the next day and his grave denoted with a wooden marker." 5 days after McCarty's killing, Garrett traveled to Santa Fe, New Mexico, to collect the $500 reward offered by Governor Lew Wallace for his capture, dead or alive. William G. Rich, the acting New Mexico governor, refused to pay the reward. Over the next few weeks, the residents of Las Vegas, Mesilla, Santa Fe, White Oak, and other New Mexico cities raised over $7,000 in reward money for Garrett. A year and 4 days after McCarty's death, the New Mexico Territorial Legislature passed a special act to grant Garrett the $500 reward promised by Governor Wallace. Because people had begun to claim Garrett unfairly ambushed McCarty, Garrett felt the need to tell his side of the story and called upon his friend, journalist Marshall Upson, to ghostwrite a book for him. The book, The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid, was first published in April 1882. Although only a few copies sold following its release, in time, it became a reference for later historians who wrote about McCarty's life. Over time, legends grew that McCarty was not killed and that Garrett staged the incident and death out of friendship so that McCarty could evade the law. During the next 50 years, a number of men claimed they were Billy the Kid. Most of these claims were easily disproven, but have remained topics of discussion and debate. In 1948, a Central Texas man, Ollie P. Roberts, also known as Brushy Bill Roberts, began claiming that he was Billy the Kid and went before New Mexico Governor Thomas J. Mabry seeking a pardon. Mabry dismissed Roberts' claim, and Roberts died shortly afterward. Nevertheless, Hyco, Texas, Roberts' town of residence, capitalized on his claim by opening a Billy the Kid museum. John Miller, an Arizona man, also claimed he was McCarty. This was unsupported by his family until 1938, sometime after his death. Miller's body was burned in the state-owned Arizona Pioneers Home Cemetery in Prescott, Arizona. In May 2005, Miller's teeth and bones were exhumed and examined, without permission from the state. DNA samples from the remainder were sent to a laboratory in Dallas and tested to compare Miller's DNA with blood samples obtained from floorboards in the old Lincoln County Courthouse and a bench where McCarty's body was allegedly placed after he was shot. According to a July 2015 article in the Washington Post, the lab results were useless. In 2004, researchers sought to exhume the remains of Catherine Antrim, McCarty's mother, whose DNA would be tested and compared with that of the body buried in William Bonney's grave. As of 2012, her body had not been exhumed. In 2007, author and amateur historian Gail Cooper files a lawsuit against the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office under the State Inspection of the Public Records Act to produce records of the results of the 2006 DNA tests and other forensic evidence collected in the Billy the Kid investigations. In April 2012, 133 pages of documents were provided. They offered no conclusive evidence confirming or disproving the generally accepted story of Garrett's killing of McCarty, but confirmed the existence of the record, and that they could have been produced earlier. In 2004, Cooper was awarded $100,000 in punitive damages, but the decision was later overturned by the New Mexico Court of Appeals. The lawsuit ultimately cost Lincoln nearly $300,000. In February 2015, historian Robert Stahl petitioned a district court in Fort Sumner asking the state of New Mexico to issue a death certificate for McCarty. In July 2015, Stahl filed suit in the New Mexico Supreme Court. The suit asked the court to order the state's Office of the Medical Investigator to officially certify McCarty's death under New Mexico state law.
Everyone knows about the legend of Bloody Mary. You stand in the mirror with all the lights off and then you call her name while looking into the mirror 3 times, more depending on which part of the world you are from. Bloody Mary then would appear and front you, and depending on how your future looks, she would either tell you your future or she would kill you and destroy your life. However, this story is not about Bloody Mary but another soul you can summon in the same way but using black candles and calling a different name. However, this soul is not a soul but a demon who will, depending on how evil it is feeling, will rip your soul from your body or buy your soul for whatever your heart desires. I was in university in the summer of 2000 and I was taking a course on the supernatural, ghosts, demons and spirits. That sort of stuff. One of the most popular urban legend that popped up in class was that of Bloody Mary. Even before I went to college or even school, I have heard of Bloody Mary. Me and my friends would tell stories of how we would look into the mirror with 2 white candles on either side and call out Mary's name. We would then make up stories of how she appeared to us and tell us how future and how rich we would be or how influential we could be. However, that was it all, just stories that kids made up to impress each other. With me now being in university and hearing about Bloody Mary, I got bored and fed up of hearing and writing about the legend. One semester, we was tasked on looking up a not-so-well-known legend and writing an essay about it. This got me very excited as I already known about the popular legends and it gave me a chance to seek on new and unknown legends. It was however going to be very tricky as there ain't going to be much info out there. I was scouring the internet for hours looking for the right legend to write about, but when it seems like I have found a legend, a little search on the web and it brings up more info about the legend. I was gutted to say the least. Now with the web out of the question, I sat and pondered for a while, thinking to myself, is there anywhere I could go that could point me to a legend that is not on the web and not so popular? I thought about going to the library and having a look to see what stories I could find about legends, but then I thought to myself that these books are also written by people who have done research on the net, and by doing so, they would also write about the most popular legends too. This was coming to a standstill. It was really doing my head in. I thought I would forget about this for a while and have a walk around town center. Maybe something would pop into my head, or maybe even I would see something. So here I am wandering around taking in the views of the town center and also window shopping. I see an old antique bookstore across the road. Maybe, just maybe, they have what I am looking for, I thought to myself. However, I was getting a tad hungry and thought that before I went to the bookstore, I should go and get a bite to eat and calm the pain that is hunger in my stomach. It was perfect, a cafe just across the road from the bookstore. I went into the cafe and made an order of pancakes and bacon with some maple syrup and a nice large cup of coffee. I was there for an hour reading while also looking at the bookstore. To say I was now really intrigued. I got up from my seat at the cafe and left a nice tip for the waitress who served me. After all, the service was great and the food was really good. I went across the street and into the old bookstore. Now inside, I was really impressed. The store looked like a library with shelves from top to bottom. There was also a section at the back where it seemed there was even older books. These books, however, was under lock and key, with the key being kept in a safe behind the shop counter. I decided that I would take a look from the front of the shop to the back of the shop. There were some nice books in the store, I must say, a lot of first editions on sale but with a hefty price tag. Still thought I couldn't find anything I was looking for. That was when I decided that I would go to the back of the store where all the other books was locked up. I was starting to lose the will to live. I couldn't find anything, and then there, near the bottom of the bookcase, I saw it. A book that read Rare and Uncommon Urban Legends. It piqued my interest and I must have it. However, the price tag on that book was way more than I would make in a year. I stood there for a while pondering while looking at the book. That is when the storekeeper saw me and came over. "I see you like this book," he said to me. "Yes, I love urban legends and need to write an essay on an unknown legend," I replied to him. "I see," he said while I turned and looked at him. He seemed to stand there for a little while thinking about something. "I tell you what, as long as you stay in the store, then I will let you read the book and choose whatever legend you want out of it to write about it," he told me. I looked at him surprised but happy he would let me do that. The store was closing in 10 minutes, so I couldn't quite stay in the store and study. I made arrangements with the storekeeper to come back after university and look over the book. I was really hoping it had something that would hook me. I made my way back to the store after university to look the book over. When I got into the store, I can see the man had took the book out of the bookshelf and laid on the table near the till ready for me to look over. I thank the man once again for letting me have the chance to look over the book. I then take a seat at the table, take out some pen and paper to take notes. I grab the book with caution and start to turn its pages. This book was indeed magnificent. Every page I look at an urban legend that I have never heard of before. This book was indeed a needle in a haystack. I turned the pages looking for that one story. Halfway through the book, I land a page that I thought was perfect. However, I heard of a similar legend before. Having a little time to myself to think, I got it. I remember why this story sounded so familiar. This story was very near the same to the legend of Bloody Mary, only there are differences. The story was called Bloody Lucifer. Intriguing, I thought to myself. You summon Lucifer the same way you would with Bloody Mary, however you light 2 black candles instead of white candles, and then also there is his name. Reading up and taking notes on the story, I got an idea in my head. A really stupid idea that I should have not acted upon, but I needed to know. I also thought that it would be stupid and that it would never happen. After I have taken all the notes, I packed my stuff, thanks the shopkeeper, and went down the road a few yards. There was also a pagan shop on the same side of the road that sold all sorts to do with the witching hour, and so I knew they would have some black candles. I picked up 2 black candles, but also thinking about it, I also picked up a few religious items, holy water, cross and a Bible. Even thought I knew nothing would happen. I wanted to make sure that I was ready for whatever happened. After my purchase, I hurried back to my dorm room and set up in the bathroom. I knew that in the bathroom I had no window, and so it would be quite dark in there. I put the black candles on either side of the mirror and also laid the religious items on the counter behind me but under a towel. I then light the 2 candles and turned on the light. The only thing I could see was my light reflection in the mirror. The instructions in the book told me that I would have to say his name 5 times and he should appear before me. I took a stance in front of the mirror, took a deep breath and slowly said bloody Lucifer, bloody Lucifer, bloody Lucifer, bloody Lucifer, bloody Lucifer. After the 5th time I stopped but got gutted. I knew it. Then out of nowhere a gust of wind blew out the candles and a horrid apparition appeared in the mirror. I must have turned white as a ghost. Who is it that summons me? What is it that you want? Speak now and sell me your soul, it spoke. I got very scared. I could think of what to do. I now had a demon in my mirror and it wanted my soul. I then remember something else in the book. So I took action. I took out the white candles and put them either side of the mirror while discarding the black candles. What do you think you are doing? That will not work, the voice said, but I refused to listen and continued. I lighted the candles and proceeded to say his name backward 5 times. This made the demon go back to hell. I then turned on the light, sprayed the mirror with holy water and took it off the wall. I went into my room and looked for some twine. I knew I had some. I then proceeded to tie the cross and Bible to the mirror and hid it in the basement of our building where no one could find it. As for the black candles, they went into the bin. As for the legend, folks, always heed warnings from the books that you read. You never know when a legend can be true or not.
Bonnie Elizabeth Parker and Clyde Champion Barrow were an American criminal couple who traveled the central United States with their gang during the Great Depression, known for their bank robberies, although they preferred to rob small stores or rural gas stations. Their exploits captured the attention of the American press and its readership during what is occasionally referred to as the Public Enemy era between 1931 and 1934. They are believed to have murdered at least 9 police officers and 4 civilians. They were killed in May 1934 during an ambush by the police near Gippsland, Louisiana. The press's portrayal of Bonnie and Clyde was sometimes at odds with the reality of their life on the road, especially for Parker. She was present at 100 or more felonies during the 2 years that she was Barrow's companion, although she was not the cigar-smoking, machine-gun-wielding depicted in newspapers, newsreels, and pulp detective magazines of the day. Nonetheless, numerous police accounts detail her attempts to murder police officers. A photo of Parker posing with a cigar came from an undeveloped roll of film that police found at an abandoned hideout, and the snapshot was published nationwide. Parker did smoke cigarettes, although she never smoked cigars. According to historian Jeff Ginn, the photos found at the hideout resulted in Parker's glamorization and creation of myths about the gang. Bonnie Elizabeth Parker was born in 1910 in Rowena, Texas, the second of 3 children. Her father Charles Robert Parker was a bricklayer who died when Bonnie was 1 year old. Her widowed mother Emma Parker moved her family back to her parents' home in Cement City, an industrial suburb in West Dallas where she worked as a seamstress. As an adult, Bonnie wrote poems such as The Story of Suicide Sally and The Trail's End, the latter more commonly known as The Story of Bonnie and Clyde. In her second year in high school, Parker met Roy Thornton. The couple dropped out of school and were married on September 25, 1926. 6 days before her 16th birthday. Their marriage was marred by his frequent absences and brushes with the law, and it proved to be short-lived. They never divorced, but their paths never crossed again after January 1929. She was still wearing his wedding ring when she died. Thornton was in prison when he heard of her death. He commented, "I'm glad they went out as they did. It's much better than being caught." Sentenced to 5 years for robbery in 1933 and after attempting several prison breaks from other facilities, Thornton was killed while trying to escape from the Huntsville State Prison on October 3, 1937. After the end of her marriage, Parker moved back in with her mother and worked as a waitress in Dallas. One of her regular customers was a postal worker Ted Hinton. In 1932, he joined the Dallas Sheriff's Department and eventually severed as a member of the posse that killed Bonnie and Clyde. Parker briefly kept a diary early in 1929 when she was 18, in which she wrote of her loneliness, her impatience with life in Dallas, and her love of taking pictures. Clyde Champion Barrow was born in 1909 into a poor farming family in Ellis County, Texas, southeast of Dallas. He was the fifth of 7 children of Henry Barrow and Cumie Walker. The family moved to Dallas in the early 1920s, part of a migration pattern from rural areas to the city where many settled in the urban slum of West Dallas. The Barrows spent their first months in West Dallas living under their wagon until they got enough money to buy a tent. Barrow was first arrested in late 1926, at age 17, after running when police confronted him over a rental car that he had failed to return on time. His second arrest was with his brother Buck soon after for possession of stolen turkeys. Barrow had some legitimate jobs from 1927 through 1929, but he also cracked safes, robbed stores, and stole cars. He met 19-year-old Parker through a mutual friend in January 1930, and they spent much time together during the following weeks. Their romance was interrupted when Barrow was arrested and convicted of auto theft. Clyde was sent to Eastham Prison Farm in April 1930 at the age of 31. He escaped from the prison farm shortly after and sent back to prison. Barrow was repeatedly sexually assaulted while in prison, and he retaliated by attacking and killing his tormentor with a pipe, crushing his skull. This was his first killing. Another inmate, who was already serving a life sentence, claimed responsibility. In order to avoid hard labor in the fields, Barrow purposely had 2 of his toes chopped off by either him or another inmate in late January 1932. Because of this, he walked with a limp for the rest of his life. However, Barrow was set free 6 days after his intentional injury. Without his knowledge, Barrow's mother had successfully petitioned for his release. He was paroled on February 2, 1932, from Eastham as a hardened and bitter criminal. His sister Marie said, "Something awful sure must have happened to him in prison because he wasn't the same person when he got out." The inmate Ralph Foltz said that he watched Clyde change from a schoolboy to a rattlesnake. In his post-Eastham career, Barrow robbed grocery stores and gas stations at a rate far outpacing the 10 or so bank robberies attributed to him and the Barrow gang. His favorite weapon was the M1918 Browning automatic rifle. According to John Neal Phillips, Barrow's goal in life was not to gain fame or fortune from robbing banks but to seek revenge against the Texas prison system for the abuses that he suffered while serving time. Several accounts describe Parker and Barrow's first meeting. The most credible states that they met on January 5, 1930, at the home of Barrow's friend Clarence Clay at 105 Herbert Street in the neighborhood of West Dallas. Barrow was 20 years old, and Parker was 19. Parker was in the kitchen making hot chocolate. Both were smitten immediately. Most historians believe that Parker joined Barrow because she had fallen in love with him. She remained his loyal companion as they carried out the many crimes and awaited the violent death that they viewed as inevitable. After Barrow's release from prison in February 1932, he and Foltz began a series of robberies, primarily of stores and gas stations. Their goal was to collect enough money and firepower to launch a raid against Eastham Prison. On April 19, Parker and Foltz were captured in a failed hardware store burglary in Kaufman in which they had intended to steal firearms. Parker was released from jail in a few months after the grand jury failed to indict her. Foltz was tried, convicted, and served time. He never rejoined the gang. On April 30, Barrow was the getaway driver in a robbery in Hillsborough during which store owner J. Ann Butcher was shot and killed. Butcher's wife identified Barrow from police photographs as one of the shooters, although he had stayed outside the car. Parker wrote poetry to pass the time in jail. She reunited with Barrow within a few weeks of her release from the Kaufman County Jail. On August 5, Barrow, Raymond Hamilton, and Ross Dyer were drinking moonshine at a country dance in Stringtown, Oklahoma when Sheriff C.G. Maxwell and Deputy Eugene Seymour approached them in a parking lot. Barrow and Hamilton opened fire, killing Moore and gravely wounding Maxwell. Moore was the first law officer that Barrow and his gang killed. They eventually murdered 9. On October 11, they allegedly killed Howard Hall at his store during a robbery in Sherman, Texas, though some historians consider this unlikely. W.D. Jones had been a friend of Barrow's family since childhood. He joined Parker and Barrow on Christmas Eve 1932 at the age of 16, and the three left Dallas that night. The next day, Christmas Day of that year, Jones and Barrow murdered Doyle Johnson, a young family man, while stealing his car in Temple. Barrow killed Tarrant County Deputy Malcolm Davis on January 6, 1933, when he, Parker, and Jones wandered into a police trap set for another criminal. The gang had murdered 5 people since April. On March 22, 1933, Clyde's brother Buck was granted a full pardon and release from prison. He and his wife Blanche set up housekeeping with Bonnie, Clyde, and Jones in a temporary hideout at 3347 Half Oak Ridge Drive in Joplin, Missouri. According to family sources, Buck and Blanche were there to visit. They attempted to persuade Clyde to surrender to law enforcement. The group ran loud, alcohol-fueled card games late into the night in the quiet neighborhood. Blanche recalled that they brought a case of beer a day. The men came and went noisily at all hours, and Clyde accidentally fired a bar in the apartment while cleaning it. No neighbors went to the house, but one reported suspicions to the Joplin Police Department. The police assembled a 5-man force in 2 cars on April 13 to confront what they suspected were bootleggers living in the garage apartment. The Barrow brothers and Jones opened fire, killing Detective Harry L. McGinnis outright and fatally wounding Constable J. W. Harriman. Parker opened fire with a bar as the others fled, forcing Highway Patrol Sergeant G.B. Collar to duck behind a large oak tree. The .30 caliber bullets from the bar struck the tree and forced wood splinters into the sergeant's face. Parker got into a car with the others, and they pulled Blanche from the street where she was pursuing her dog Snowball. The surviving officers later testified that they had fired only 14 rounds in the conflict. 1 hit Jones on the side, 1 struck Clyde but was deflected by his suit coat button, and 1 grazed Buck after ricocheting off a wall. The group escaped the police at Joplin but left behind most of their possessions at the apartment, including Buck's parole papers, a large arsenal of weapons, a handwritten poem by Bonnie, and a camera with several rolls of undeveloped film. Police developed the film at the Joplin Globe and found many photos of Barrow, Parker, and Jones posing and pointing weapons at one another. The Globe sent the poem and the photos over the newswire, including a photo of Parker clenching a cigar in her teeth and a pistol in her hand, and the gang of criminals became front-page news throughout America as the Barrow Gang. The photo of Parker posting with a cigar and gun became popular. The group ranged from Texas as far north as Minnesota for the next 3 months. In May, they tried to rob a bank in Okabena, Minnesota. They kidnapped Dillard Darby and Sophia Stone at Ruston, Louisiana in the course of stealing Darby's car. This was one of several events between 1932 and 1934 in which they kidnapped police officers or robbery victims. They usually released their hostages far from home, sometimes with money to help them return home. Stories of such encounters made headlines, as did the more violent episodes. The Barrow Gang did not hesitate to shoot anyone who got in their way, whether it was a police officer or an innocent civilian. Other members of the Barrow Gang who committed murder included Hamilton, Jones, Buck, and Henry Methvine. Eventually, the cold-bloodedness of their murders opened the public's eyes to the reality of their crimes and led to their ends. The photos entertained the public for a time, but the gang was desperate and discontented, as described by Blanche in her account written while imprisoned in the late 1930s. With their notoriety, their daily lives became more difficult, as they tried to evade discovery. Restaurants and motels became less secure, they resorted to campfire cooking and bathing in cold streams. The unrelieved, round-the-clock proximity of 5 people in one car gave rise to vicious bickering. Janes was the driver when he and Barrow stole a car belonging to Darby in late April, and he used that car to leave the others. He stayed away until June 8. Barrow failed to see warning signs at a bridge under construction on June 10, while driving with Jones and Parker near Wellington, Texas, and their car flipped into a ravine. Sources disagree on whether there was a gasoline fire or if Parker was doused with acid from the car's battery under the floorboards, but she sustained third-degree burns to her right leg, so severe that the muscles contracted and caused the leg to draw up. Jones observed, "She has been burned so bad none of us thought she was gonna live. The hide on her leg was gone, from her hip down to her ankle. I could see the bone at places." Parker could hardly walk, she either hopped on her good leg or was carried by Barrow. They got help from a nearby farm, then kidnapped Collinsworth County Sheriff George Corey and City Marshal Paul Hardy, leaving the two of them handcuffed and barbed-wired to a tree outside Erick, Oklahoma. The three rendezvoused with Buck and Blanche and hid in a tourist court near Fort Smith, Arkansas, nursing Parker's burns. Buck and Jones bungled a robbery and murdered Town Marshal Henry D. Humphrey in Alma, Arkansas. The criminals had to flee, despite Parker's grave condition. In July 1933, the gang checked into the Red Crown Tourist Court, south of Platte City, Missouri. It consisted of 2 brick cabins joined by garages, and the gang rented both. To the south stood the Red Crown Tavern, a popular restaurant among Missouri highway patrolmen, and the gang seemed to go out of their way to draw attention. Blanche registered the party as 3 guests, but owner Neil Hauser could see 5 people getting out of the car. He noted that the driver backed into the garage gangster style for a quick getaway. Blanche paid for their cabins with coins rather than bills and did the same later when buying 5 dinners and 5 beers. The next day, Hauser noticed that his guests had taped newspapers over the windows of their cabin. Barrow and Jones went into town to purchase bandages, crackers, cheese, and atropine sulfate to treat Parker's leg. The druggist contacts Sheriff Holt Coffey, who put the cabins under surveillance. Coffey had been alerted by Oklahoma, Texas, and Arkansas law enforcement to watch for strangers seeking such supplies. The sheriff contacted Captain Baxter, who called for reinforcements for Kansas City, including an armored car. Sheriff Coffey led a group of officers toward the cabins at 11 p.m., armed with Thompson submachine guns. In the gunfight which ensued, the .45 caliber Thompsons proved no match for Barrow's .30 caliber bar, stolen on July 7 from the National Guard Armory at Enid, Oklahoma. The gang escaped when a bullet short-circuited the horn on the armored car and police officers mistook it for a ceasefire signal. They did not pursue the retreating Barrow vehicle. The gang had evaded the law once again, but Buck had sustained a bullet wound that blasted a large hole in his forehead skull bone and exposed his injured brain, and Blanche was nearly blinded by glass fragments in both her eyes. The Barrow gang camped at Dexfield Park, an abandoned amusement park near Dexter, Iowa, on July 24. Buck was sometimes semi-conscious, and he even talked and ate, but his massive head wound and loss of blood were so severe that Barrow and Jones dug a grave for him. Local residents noticed their bloody bandages, and officers determined that the campers were the Barrow gang. Local police officers and approximately 100 spectators surrounded the group, and the Barrows soon came under fire. Barrow, Parker, and Jones escaped on foot. Buck was shot in the back, and he and his wife were captured by the officers. Buck died of his head wound and pneumonia after surgery 5 days later at King's Daughters Hospital in Perry, Iowa. For the next 6 weeks, The remaining perpetrators ranged far afield from their usual area of operations, west to Colorado, north to Minnesota, southeast to Mississippi, yet they continued to commit armed robberies. They restocked their arsenal when Barrow and Jones robbed an armory at Platteville, Illinois on August 20, acquiring 3 bars, handguns, and a large quantity of ammunition. By early September, the gang risked a run to Dallas to see their families for the first time in 4 months. Jones parted company with them, continuing to Houston where his mother had moved. He was arrested there without incident on November 16 and returned to Dallas. Through autumn, Barrow committed several robberies with small-time local accomplices, while his family and Parker's attended to her considerable medical needs. On November 22, they narrowly evaded arrest while trying to meet with family members near Sowers, Texas. Dallas Sheriff Smoot Schmid, Deputy Bob Alcorn, and Deputy Ted Hinton lay in wait nearby. As Barrow drove up, he sensed a trap and drove past his family's car, at which point Schmid and his deputies stood up and opened fire with machine guns and a bar. The family members in the crossfire were not hit, but a bar bullet passed through the car, striking the legs of both Barrow and Parker. They escaped later that night. On November 28, a Dallas grand jury delivered a murder indictment against Parker and Barrow for the killing, in January of that year, nearly 10 months earlier, of Tarrant County Deputy Malcolm Davis. It was Parker's first warrant for murder. On January 16, 1934, Barrow orchestrated the escape of Hamilton, Methvine, and several others in the East Ham breakout. The brazen raid generated negative publicity for Texas, and Barrow seemed to have achieved what historian Phillips suggests was his overriding goal: revenge on the Texas Department of Corrections. Barrow gang member Joe Palmer shot Major Joe Croson during his escape, and Croson died a few days later in the hospital. This attack attracted the full power of the Texas and federal government to the manhunt for Barrow and Parker. As Croson struggled for life, prison chief Lee Simmons reportedly promised him that all persons involved in the breakout would be hunted down and killed. All of them eventually were, except for Methvine, who preserved his life by setting up the ambush of Barrow and Parker. The Texas Department of Corrections contacted former Texas Ranger Captain Frank Hammer and persuaded him to hunt down the Barrow gang. He was retired, but his commission had not expired. He accepted the assignment as a Texas Highway Patrol officer, secondarily assigned to the prison system as a special investigator, and given the specific task of taking down the Barrow gang. Hammer was tall, burly, taciturn, unimpressed by authority, and driven by an inflexible adherence to right, or what he thinks is right. For 20 years, he had been feared and admired throughout Texas as the walking embodiment of the One Riot, One Ranger ethos. He had acquired a formidable reputation as a result of several spectacular captures and the shooting of a number of Texas criminals. He was officially credited with 53 kills and suffered 17 wounds. Prison boss Simmons always said publicly that Hammer had been his first choice, although there is evidence that he first approached 2 other Rangers, both of whom declined because they were reluctant to shoot a woman. Starting on February 10, Hammer became the constant shadow of Barrow and Parker, living out of his car, just a town or 2 behind them. 3 of Hammer's 4 brothers were also Texas Rangers. Brother Harrison was the best shot of the 4, but Frank was considered the most tenacious. Barrow and Methvine killed Highway Patrolman H. D. Murphy and Edward Bryant Wheeler on Easter Sunday, April 1, 1934, at the intersection of Route 114 and Dove Road, near Grapevine, Texas. An eyewitness account said that Barrow and Parker fired the fatal shots, and his story got widespread coverage before it was discredited. Methvine later admitted that he fired the first shot, after assuming that Barrow wanted the officers killed. He also said that Parker approached the dying officers intending to help them, not to administer the coup de grace as described by discredited eyewitnesses. Barrow joined in, firing at Patrolman Murphy. It has long been assumed that Parker was asleep in the back seat when Methvine started shooting and took no part in the assault. During the second spring season, the Grapevine killings were recounted in exaggerated detail, affecting public perception. All four Dallas daily papers seized on the story told by the eyewitness, a farmer who claimed to have seen Parker laugh at the way that Murphy's head bounced like a rubber ball on the ground as she shot him. The stories claimed that police found a cigar butt with tiny teeth marks, supposedly those of Parker. Several days later, Murphy's fiancée wore her intended wedding dress to his funeral, attracting photos and newspaper coverage. The eyewitness's ever-changing story was soon discredited, but the massive negative publicity increased the public clamor for the extermination of the Barrow Gang. The outcry galvanized the authorities into action, and Highway Patrol boss L.G. Fares offered a reward of $1,000 for the dead bodies of the Grapevine slayers, not their capture, just the bodies. Texas Governor Ma Ferguson added another reward of $500 for each of the two killers, which meant that, for the first time, there was a specific price on Bonnie's head since she was so widely believed to have shot H.D. Murphy. Public hostility increased 5 days later when Barrow and Methvin murdered 60-year-old Constable William Cal Campbell, a widower, and father, near Commerce, Oklahoma. They kidnapped Commerce Police Chief Percy Boyd, crossed the state line into Kansas, and let him go, giving him a clean shirt, a few dollars, and a request from Parker to tell the world that she did not smoke cigars. Boyd identified both Barrow and Parker to authorities, but he never learned Methvin's name. The resultant warrant for the Campbell murder specified Clyde Barrow, Bonnie Parker, and John Doe. Historian Knight writes, for the first time, Bonnie was seen as a killer, actually pulling the trigger, just like Clyde. Whatever chance she had for clemency had just been reduced. The Dallas Journal ran a cartoon on its editorial page, showing an empty electric chair with a sign on it saying reserved, adding the words Clyde and Bonnie. Barrow and Parker were killed on May 23, 1934, on a rural road in Beanville Parish, Louisiana. Hammer, who had begun tracking the gang on February 12, led the posse. He had studied the gang's movements and found that they swung in a circle skirting the edges of 5 Midwestern states, exploiting the state line rule which prevented officers from pursuing a fugitive into another jurisdiction. Barrow was consistent in his movements, so Hammer charted his path and predicted where he would go. The gang's itinerary centered on family visits, and they were due to see Methvin's family in Louisiana. In case they were separated, Barrow had designated Methvin's parents' residence as a rendezvous, and Methvin became separated from the rest of the gang in Shreveport. Hammer's posse was composed of 6 men. On May 21, the 4 posse members from Texas were in Shreveport when they learned that Barrow and Parker were planning a visit to Beanville Parish that evening with Methvin. The full posse set up an ambush along Louisiana State Highway 154 south of Gippsland towards Sales. Hinton recounted that their group was in place by 9 p.m. and waited through the whole next day with no sign of the perpetrators. Other accounts said that the officers set up on the evening of May 22. At approximately 9:15 a.m. on May 23, the posse was still concealed in the bushes and almost ready to give up when they heard the Ford V8 Barrow was driving approaching at high speed. In their official report, they stated they had persuaded Ivy Methvin to position his truck along the shoulder of the road that morning. They hoped Barrow would stop to speak to him, putting his vehicle close to the posse's position in the bushes. When Barrow fell into the trap, the lawmen opened fire while the vehicle was still moving. Oakley fired first, probably before any order to so. Barrow was killed instantly by Oakley's headshot, and Hinton reported hearing Parker scream. The officers fired about 130 rounds, emptying their weapons into the car. Many of Bonnie and Clyde's wounds would have been fatal, yet the two had survived bullet wounds over the years in the confrontations with the law. Actual film footage was taken by one of the deputies immediately after the ambush show 112 bullet holes in the vehicle, of which around a quarter struck the couple. The official coroner's report by Parish Coroner Dr. J. L. Wade listed 17 entrance wounds on Barrow's body and 26 on that of Parker, including several headshots on each, and one that had snapped Barrow's spinal column. Undertaker C.F. Boots Bailey had difficulty embalming the bodies because of all the bullet holes. The deafened officers inspected the vehicle and discovered an arsenal of weapons, including stolen automatic rifles, sawed-off semi-automatic shotguns, assorted handguns, and several thousand rounds of ammunition, along with 15 sets of license plates from various states. Hammer stated, "I hate to bust the cap on a woman, especially when she was sitting down, however, if it wouldn't have been here, it would have been us." Word of the deaths quickly got around when Hammer, Jordan, Oakley, and Hinton drove into town to telephone their respective bosses. A crowd soon gathered at the spot. Galt and Alcorn were left to guard the bodies, but they lost control of the jostling, curious throng. One woman cut off bloody locks of Parker's hair and pieces from her dress, which were subsequently sold as souvenirs. Hinton returned to find a man trying to cut off Barrow's trigger finger and was sickened by what was occurring. Arriving on scene, the coroner reported, nearly everyone had begun collecting souvenirs such as shell casings, slivers of glass from the shattered car windows, and bloody pieces of clothing from the garments of Bonnie and Clyde. One eager man had opened his pocket knife and was reaching into the car to cut off Clyde's left ear. Hinton enlisted Hammer's help in controlling a circus-like atmosphere and they got people away from the car. The posse towed the Ford, with the dead bodies still inside, to the Conger Furniture Store and Funeral Parlor in downtown Arcadia, Louisiana. Preliminary embalming was done by Bailey in a small preparation room in the back of the furniture store, as it was common for furniture stores and undertakers to share the same space. The population of the northwest Louisiana town reportedly swelled from 2,000 to 12,000 within hours. Curious throngs arrived by train, horseback, buggy, and plane. Beer normally sold for 15 cents a bottle, but it jumped to 25 cents, and sandwiches quickly sold out. Barrow had been shot in the head by a .35 Remington Model 8. Henry Barrow identified his son's body, then sat weeping in a rocking chair in the furniture section. H.D. Darby was an undertaker at the McClure Funeral Parlor, and Sophia Stone was a home demonstration agent, both from nearby Ruston. Both of them came to Arcadia to identify the bodies because the Barrow gang had kidnapped them in 1933. Parker reportedly had laughed when she discovered that Darby was an undertaker. She remarked that maybe someday he would be working on her. Darby did assist Bailey in the embalming. Bonnie and Clyde wished to be buried side by side, but the Parker family would not allow it. Her mother wanted to grant her final wish to be brought home, but the mob surrounding the Parker house made that impossible. More than 20,000 attended Parker's funeral, and her family had difficulty reaching for her gravesite. Parker's services were held on May 26. Dr. Alan Campbell recalled that flowers came from everywhere, including some with cards allegedly from Pretty Boy Floyd and John Dillinger. The largest floral tribute was sent by a group of Dallas City newsboys. The sudden end of Bonnie and Clyde sold 500,000 newspapers in Dallas alone. Parker was buried in the Fish Trap Cemetery, although she was moved in 1945 to the new Crown Hill Cemetery in Dallas. Thousands of people gathered outside both Dallas funeral homes, hoping for a chance to view the bodies. Barrow's private funeral was held at sunset on May 25. He was buried in Western Heights Cemetery in Dallas, next to his brother Martine. The Barrow brothers share a single granite marker with their names on it and an epitaph selected by Clyde. Gone but not forgotten. The 6 men of the posse were each to receive a 1/6 share of the reward money, and Dallas Sheriff Schmidt had promised Hinton that this would total some $26,000, but most of the organizations that had pledged reward funds suddenly reneged on their pledges. In the end, each lawman earned $200.23 for his efforts and collected memorabilia. By the summer of 1934, new federal statutes made bank robbery and kidnapping federal offenses. The growing coordination of local authorities by the FBI, plus two-way radios and police cars, combined to make it more difficult to carry out a series of robberies and murders than it had been just months before. 2 months after that, Floyd was killed in Ohio, and 1 month after that, Babyface Nelson was killed in Illinois. Parker's niece and last surviving relative are campaigning to have her aunt buried next to Barrow. The members of the posse came from 3 organizations. Hammer and Galt were both former Texas Rangers then working for the Texas Department of Corrections. Hinton and Alcorn were employees of the Dallas Sheriff's Office, and Jordan and Oakley were sheriff and deputy of Beanville Parish, Louisiana. The 3 duos distrusted one another and kept to themselves, and each had its own agenda in the operation and offered differing narratives of it. Simmons, the head of Texas DOC, brought another perspective, having effectively commissioned the posse. Schmidt had tried to arrest Barrow in Sowers, Texas in November 1933. Schmidt called halt, and gunfire erupted from the outlaw car, which made a quick U-turn and sped away. Schmidt's Thompson machine gun jammed on the first round, and he could not get off one shot. The pursuit of Barrow was impossible because the posse had parked their own cars at a distance to prevent their being seen. Hammer's posse discussed calling halt, but the 4 Texans vetoed the idea, telling them that the killer's history had always been to shoot their way out, as had occurred in Platte City, Dexfield Park, and Sowers. When the ambush occurred, Oakley stood up and opened fire, and the other officers opened fire immediately after. Jordan was reported to have called out to Barrow. Alcorn said that Hammer called out, and Hinton claimed that Alcorn did. In another report, each said that they both did. These conflicting claims might have been collegial attempts to divert the focus from Oakley, who later admitted firing too early, but that is merely speculation. In 1979, Hinton's account of the saga was published posthumously as Ambush, the real story of Bonnie and Clyde. His version of the Methvin family's involvement in the planning and execution of the ambush was that the posse had tied Methvin's father Ivy to a tree the previous night to keep him from warning of the couple. Hinton claimed that Hammer made a deal with Ivy: if he kept quiet about being tied up, his son would escape prosecution for the 2 Grapevine murders. Hinton alleged that Hammer made every member of the posse swear that they would never divulge this secret. Other accounts, however, place Ivy at the center of the action, not tied up but on the road, waving for Barrow to stop. Hinton's memoir suggests that Parker's cigar in the famous cigar photo had been a rose and that it was retouched as a cigar by darkroom staff at the Joplin Globe while they prepared the photo for publication. Ginn says that some people who knew Hinton suspect that he became delusional late in life. The posse never received the promised bounty on the perpetrators, so they told them to take whatever they wanted from the confiscated items in their car. Hammer appropriated the arsenal of stolen guns and ammunition, plus a box of fishing tackle, under the terms of his compensation package with the Texas DOC in July. Clyde's mother Cumie wrote to Hammer asking for the return of the guns. "You don't ever want to forget my boy was never tried in no court for murder, and no one is guilty until proven guilty by some court, so I hope you will answer this letter and also return the guns I am asking for." There is no record of any response. Alcorn claimed Barrow's saxophone from the car, but he later returned it to the Barrows family. Posse members also took other personal items, such as Parker's clothing. The Parker family asked for them back but were refused, and the items were later sold as souvenirs. The Barrow family claimed that Sheriff Jordan kept an alleged suitcase of cash, and writer Jeff Ginn claims that Jordan bought a barn and land in Arcadia soon after the event, thereby hinting that the accusation had merit, despite the complete absence of any evidence to the existence of such a suitcase. Jordan did attempt to keep the death car for his own, but Ruth Warren of Topeka, Kansas sued him because she was the owner of the car when Barrow stole it on April 29. Jordan returned it to her in August 1934, still covered in blood and human tissue. In February 1935, Dallas and federal authorities arrested and tried 20 family members and friends of aiding and abetting Barrow and Parker. This became known as the harboring trial, and all 20 either pleaded guilty or were found guilty. The two mothers were jailed for 30 days. Other sentences ranged from 2 years imprisonment to 1 hour in custody. Other defendants included Blanche, Jones, Methvine, and Parker's sister Billie. Blanche was permanently blinded in her left eye during the 1933 shootout at Dexfield Park. She was taken into custody on the charge of assault with intent to kill. She was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison but was paroled in 1939 for good behavior. She returned to Dallas, leaving her life of crime in the past, and lived with her invalid father as his caregiver. In 1940, she married Eddie Frazier, worked as taxicab dispatcher and a beautician, and completed the terms of her parole in 1969. Warren Beatty approached her to purchase the rights to her name for use in the 1967 film, Bonnie and Clyde, and she agreed to the original script. However, she objected to her characterization by Estelle Parsons in the final film, describing the actress's Academy Award-winning portrayal of her as a screaming horse's ass. Despite this, she maintained a firm friendship with Beatty. She died from cancer at age 77 on December 24, 1988, and was buried in Dallas's Grove Hill Memorial Park under the name Blanche B. Frazier. Barrow cohorts Hamilton and Palmer, who escaped Eastham in January 1034, were recaptured. Both were convicted of murder and executed in the electric chair at Huntsville, Texas on May 10, 1935. Jones had left Barrow and Parker, 6 weeks after the three of them evaded officers at Dexfield Park in July 1933. He reached Houston and got a job picking cotton, where he was soon discovered and captured. He was returned to Dallas, where he dictated a confession in which he claimed to have been kept prisoner by Barrow and Parker. Some of the more lurid lies that he told concerned the gang's sex lives, and this testimony gave rise to many stories about Barrow's ambiguous sexuality. Jones was convicted of the murder of Doyle Johnson and served a lenient sentence of 15 years. He gave an interview to Playboy magazine during the excitement surrounding the 1967 move, saying that in reality, it had not been glamorous. He was killed on August 4, 1974, in a misunderstanding by the jealous boyfriend of a woman whom he was trying to help. Methvine was convicted in Oklahoma of the 1934 murder of Constable Campbell at Commerce. He was paroled in 1942 and killed by a train in 1948. He fell asleep drunk on the train tracks, although some have speculated that he was pushed by someone seeking revenge. His father Ivy was killed in 1946 by a hit-and-run driver. Parker's husband Roy Thornton was sentenced to 5 years for burglary in March 1933. He was killed by guards on October 3, 1937, during an escape attempt from Eastham Prison. Prentice Oakley admitted to friends that he had fired prematurely. He succeeded Henderson Jordan as sheriff of Beanville Parish in 1940. Hammer returned to a quiet life as a freelance security consultant for royal companies. According to Ginn, his reputation suffered somewhat after Gippsland because many people felt that he had not given Barrow and Parker a fair chance to surrender. He made headlines again in 1948 when he and Governor Coke Stevenson unsuccessfully challenged the votes achieved by Lyndon Johnson during the election for the U.S. Senate. He died in 1955 at the age of 71, after several years of poor health. Bob Alcorn died on May 23, 1964. 30 years to the day after the Gippsland ambush. The bullet-riddled Ford became a popular traveling attraction. The car was displayed at fairs, amusement parks, and flea markets for 3 decades, and once became a fixture at a Nevada racetrack. There was a charge of $1 to sit in it. The Ford was sold between casinos after being displayed in a Las Vegas car museum in the 1980s. It was shown in Iowa, Missouri, and Nevada. Since 2011, the Ford has been on display at Whiskey Pete's Hotel Casino, near the border between California and Nevada, alongside Interstate 15. Texas Rangers, troopers, and Department of Public Safety staff honored Patrolman Edward Brian Wheeler on April 1, 2011, the 77th anniversary of the Grapevine murders, when the Bear Gang murdered Wheeler on Easter Sunday. They presented the Yellow Rose of Texas commendation to his last surviving sibling, 95-year-old Ella Wheeler McLeod of San Antonio, giving her a plaque and framed portrait of her brother, Robert LeRoy Parker, April 13, 1866, November 7, 1908, better known as Butch Cassidy, was an American train and bank robber and the leader of a gang of criminal outlaws known as the Wild Bunch in the Old West. Parker engaged in criminal activity for more than a decade at the end of the 19th century, but the pressures of being pursued by law enforcement, notably the Pinkerton Detective Agency, forced him to flee the country. He fled with his accomplice Harry Alonzo Longabaugh, known as the Sundance Kid, and Longabaugh's girlfriend Etta Place. The trio traveled first to Argentina and then to Bolivia, where Parker and Longabaugh are believed to have been killed in a shootout with the Bolivian army in November 1908. The exact circumstances of their fate continue to be disputed. Parker's life and death have been extensively dramatized in film, television, and literature, and he remains one of the most well-known icons of the Wild West mythos in modern times. Robert LeRoy Parker was born on April 13, 1866, in Beaver, Utah Territory, the first of 13 children of British immigrants Maximilian Parker and Anne Campbell Gillies. The Parker and Gillies families had converted to the Mormon faith while still living in the United Kingdom. Maximilian Parker was 12 years old when his family arrived in Salt Lake City in 1856 as Mormon pioneers. Anne Gillies was born and lived in Tyneside in northeast England before immigrating to the U.S. with her family in 1859 at age 14. The couple was married in July 1865. Robert Parker grew up on his parents' ranch near Circleville, about 215 miles, 346 kilometers, south of Salt Lake City. Parker fled his home as a teenager, and while working on a dairy ranch, met cattle thief Mike Cassidy. He subsequently worked on several ranches, in addition to a brief apprenticeship with a butcher in Rock Springs, Wyoming, where he got his nickname, by the word butcher, which morphed later into Butch, to which he soon added the last name Cassidy in honor of his old friend and mentor. Butch Cassidy's first criminal offense was minor. Around 1880, he journeyed to a clothier's shop in another town but found it closed. He broke into the shop and stole a pair of jeans and some pie, leaving an IOU promising to pay on his next visit. The clothier pressed charges, but Cassidy was acquitted by a jury. He continued to work on ranches until 1884, when he moved to Telluride, Colorado, ostensibly to seek work, but perhaps to deliver stolen horses to buyers. Cassidy led a cowboy's life in Wyoming and Montana before returning to Telluride in 1887, where he met Matt Warner, the owner of a racehorse. Cassidy and Warner raced the horse at various events, dividing the winnings between them. 1889 to 1895. Cassidy's first bank robbery took place on June 24, 1889, when Warner, two of the McCarty brothers, and robbed the San Miguel Valley Bank in Telluride. Businessman L.L. Nunn had taken a controlling interest in the bank the previous year. The robbers stole around $21,000, equivalent to $598,000 in 2019, after which they fled to the Robbers' Roost, a remote hideout in southeastern Utah. In 1890, Cassidy purchased a ranch on the outskirts of Du Bois, Wyoming. This location is across the state from the notorious Hole in the Wall, a natural geological formation, and a popular hideout for outlaw gangs, including Cassidy's, during the era. Cassidy's ranching was possibly a facade for clandestine activities, perhaps with Hole in the Wall outlaws, as he was never financially successful at ranching. Cassidy's ranch used the unmistakable brand of Reverse E, Box E. In early 1894, Cassidy became involved romantically with the rancher and outlaw Ann Bassett. Her father was a rancher who did business with Cassidy, supplying him with fresh horses and beef. That same year, Cassidy was arrested at Lander, Wyoming, for stealing horses and possibly for running a protection racket among the local ranchers there. He was imprisoned in the Wyoming State Prison in Laramie, where he served 18 months of a 2-year sentence. He was released and pardoned in January 1896 by Governor William Alfred Richards. He became involved briefly with Bassett's older sister Josie before returning to Anne. Cassidy associated with a wide circle of criminals, most notably his closest friend William Ellsworth Elsie, Harvey Kid Curry Logan, Ben Kilpatrick, Harry Tracy, Will Noose Carver, Laura Bullion, and George Flatnose Curry, who collectively became the so-called Wild Bunch. The gang assembled sometime after Cassidy's release from prison in 1896, and took its name from the Doolin Dalton Gang, also known as the Wild Bunch. On August 13, 1896, Cassidy, Leigh, Logan, and Bob Meeks robbed the bank at Montpelier, Idaho, escaping with roughly $7,000. Cassidy recruited Harry Alonzo Longabaugh, also known as the Sundance Kid, into the gang soon after. Bassett, Leigh, and Leigh's girlfriend Maud Davis all joined Cassidy at Robber's Roost in early 1897. The four hid there until early April when Leigh and Cassidy sent the women home so that the men could plan their next robbery. They ambushed a small group of men carrying the payroll of the Pleasant Valley Coal Company in the mining town of Castlegate, Utah, on April 22, 1897, stealing a sack containing $7,000 in gold, with which they fled back to the Robber's Roost. On June 2, 1899, the gang robbed a Union Pacific Overland Flyer passenger train near Wilcox, Wyoming, a robbery that earned them a great deal of notoriety and resulted in a massive manhunt. Many notable lawmen took part in the hunt, but they did not find them. Kid Curry and George Curry had a shootout with lawmen following the train robbery, killing Sheriff Joe Hazen. Tom Horn, a killer for hire employed by the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, was told by explosives expert Bill Speck about the Hazen shooting. Pinkerton detective Charlie Siringo was then assigned the task of capturing the outlaws. He became friends with Elfie Longiski, who was using the last name Curry after becoming pregnant by Kid Curry's brother Lonnie Logan, and Siringo intended to locate the gang through her. On July 11, 1899, Leigh and others were involved in a Colorado and Southern Railroad train robbery near Folsom, New Mexico, which Cassidy might have planned and personally directed. A shootout ensued with local law enforcement, during which Leigh killed Sheriff Edward Farr and Henry Love. Leigh was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment at the New Mexico State Penitentiary. The Wild Bunch typically separated following a robbery and fled in different directions, later reuniting at a predetermined location such as the Hole in the Wall, Robber's Roost, or Fanny Porter's brothel in San Antonio. Cassidy approached Utah Governor Heber Wells to negotiate an amnesty. Wells advised him to ask the Union Pacific Railroad to drop their criminal complaints against him, and Union Pacific Chairman E. H. Harriman attempted to meet with Cassidy through Warner. On August 29, 1900, Cassidy, Longabaugh, and others robbed Union Pacific Train No. 3 near Tipton, Wyoming, breaking Cassidy's earlier promise to the governor of Wyoming and ending any chance for amnesty. 1901. On February 28, 1900, lawmen attempted to arrest Lonnie Logan at his aunt's home. Lonnie was killed in the shootout that followed, and his cousin Bob Lee was arrested for rustling and sent to prison in Wyoming. On March 28, George Curry and Noose Carver were pursued by a posse from St. Johns, Apache County, Arizona, after using currency they had stolen in the Wilcox train robbery. The posse engaged them in a shootout, during which deputies Andrew Gibbons and Frank Lesueur were killed, while Carver and Curry escaped. On April 17, George Curry was killed in a shootout with Grand County, Utah, Sheriff John Tyler, and Deputy Sam Jenkins. On May 26, Kid Curry rode into Moab, Utah, and killed both Tyler and Jenkins in another shootout in retaliation for the deaths of George and Lonnie. In December, Cassidy posed alongside Longabaugh, Logan, Carver, and Ben Kilpatrick in Fort Worth, Texas, for the now famous Fort Worth 5 photograph. The Pinkerton agency obtained a copy of the photograph and began to use it for wanted posters. On July 3, 1901, Kid Curry and a group of men robbed a Great Northern train near Wagner, Montana, stealing more than $60,000 in cash, equivalent to $1,840,000 in 2019. The gang split up, but a posse led by Sheriff Elijah Bryant caught up with News Carver and killed him. Kilpatrick was captured in St. Louis on November 5 at Josie Blakey's resort on Chestnut Street. In his pocket, they found a key to a room at the Lockleed Hotel. The next morning, they found Laurel Bullion in the lobby, checking out with her luggage. In her valise was $8,500 in unsigned banknotes from the Great Northern robbery. Curry killed Knoxville policemen William Dinwiddie and Robert Saylor in another shootout on December 13, then escaped. He returned to Montana, pursued by Pinkertons and other law enforcement officers, where he shot and killed rancher James Winters in retaliation for killing his brother Johnny years before. Cassidy and Longabaugh fled to New York City, feeling continuous pressure from the numerous law enforcement agencies pursuing them and seeing their gang falling apart. They departed from there to Buenos Aires, Argentina aboard the British steamer Herminius on February 20, 1901, along with Longabaugh's companion Etta Place. Cassidy posed as James Ryan, Place's fictitious brother. They settled in a 4-room log cabin on a 15,000-acre ranch that they purchased on the east bank of the Rio Blanco near Calilla, just east of the Andes and the Chubut. Two English-speaking bandits held up the Banco de Tarapaco y Argentino in Rio Gallegos on February 14, 1905. 700 miles south of Calilla near the Strait of Magellan, and the pair vanished north across the Patagonian grasslands. Cassidy and Longabaugh sold the Calilla ranch on May 1, fearing that law enforcement had located them. The Pinkerton agency had known their location for some time, but the snow and the hard winter of Patagonia had prevented their agent Frank de Mayo from making an arrest. Governor Julio Lozano issued an arrest warrant, but Sheriff Edward Humphreys, a Welsh Argentine who was friendly with Cassidy and enamored of Place, tipped them off. The trio then fled north to San Carlos de Bariloche, where they embarked on the steamer Condor across Nahuel Huapi Lake and into Chile. They returned to Argentina by the end of the year.